Picture a luxurious yacht anchored off the Cornish coast, where wealth and secrets collide. A scream pierces the night, and Miss Sylvia Grey, a quiet secretary, is found stabbed on the deck. Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, steps into a web of lie-stolen pearls, cryptic notes, and a hidden ledger. With a cast of suspects harboring dark motives, Poirot's little grey cells unravel a shocking truth. Will he catch the killer before the yacht reaches shore? Dive into Murder on the Sapphire Yacht, a classic Agatha Christie style mystery. Chapter 1. The Sapphire Yacht. The late summer sun hung low over the Cornish coast, casting a golden sheen across the gentle waves that lapped at the hull of the Sapphire Yacht. Anchored a mile from the cliffs of St. Mawes, the vessel gleamed with an elegance that belied its age, its polished teak decks and brass fittings catching the light like a jewel set against the sea. It was a floating haven of luxury, a testament to the wealth and ambition of its owner, Sir Reginald Haverford, a man whose fortune in shipping had secured him a knighthood and a reputation for ruthless charm. Tonight, the yacht was to host a select gathering of guests, each invited for reasons that, to the casual observer, seemed as innocuous as a weekend of leisure. Yet beneath the polished veneer of civility, an undercurrent of unease stirred, like the faint ripples that betrayed a hidden current dot. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion of Hercule Poirot, stood at the yacht's railing, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the scene. The air was warm, scented with salt and the faint perfume of the ladies' evening gowns as they mingled on the deck. Hastings, with his soldierly bearing and earnest demeanour, felt a pang of discomfort amidst such opulence. He was not a man for ostentation, and the Sapphire Yacht, with its crystal chandeliers and velvet-upholstered lounges, seemed to him a stage set for some unspoken drama. "It is a fine vessel, is it not, Hastings?" came a voice at his side, smooth and accented with the precise cadence of a Belgian upbringing. Hercule Poirot, diminutive and immaculate in his tailored dinner jacket, adjusted his pince-nez and gazed out at the horizon. His moustache, waxed to perfection, twitched slightly as he inhaled the sea air. "But I confess, mon ami, there is something about this gathering that unsettles the little grey cells. It is too perfect, too arranged." Hastings turned, his brow furrowed. "Arranged, Poirot. It's just a weekend party. Sir Reginald's known for these things lavish, exclusive, a chance to show off his wealth. I dare say it's all harmless enough." Poirot's green eyes glinted with a knowing amusement. "Harmless, you say? Nan, Hastings. Where there is wealth, there is envy. Where there is envy, there is motive. And where there is motive—" He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the guests assembling on the deck below. The party was small, deliberately so, with only 8 souls aboard a side. From the crew, Sir Reginald Haverford himself stood at the centre, a robust man of 50 with a booming laugh and a penchant for holding court. His wife, Lady Evelyn Haverford, drifted beside him, her delicate frame draped in a gown of sapphire silk that matched the yacht's name. She was younger than her husband, perhaps 35, with an ethereal beauty marred only by the faint tightness around her eyes, as though she carried a secret she dared not share. Nearby, Dr. Leonard Baxter, a Harley Street physician with a reputation for discretion, sipped a glass of champagne and watched the others with a clinical detachment. His wife, Clara Baxter, a vivacious woman with a sharp tongue and a taste for scandal, laughed too loudly at a jest from young Mr. Julian Trent, a stockbroker whose boyish charm masked a rumoured penchant for risky investments. Miss Beatrice Langley, a novelist of some repute, stood apart, her pen poised over a small notebook as she observed the scene with the intensity of a hawk. Then there was Mr. Victor Crane, a dour solicitor who seemed ill at ease in such company, his fingers fidgeting with the stem of his glass. Finally, Miss Sylvia Grey, Sir Reginald's private secretary, moved among the guests with quiet efficiency, her plain features and reserved demeanour rendering her almost invisible. The crew, under the command of Captain Mortimer, a weathered man with a scar across his cheek, kept to their duties with practised discretion. Hastings noted their efficiency, the way they moved like shadows, ensuring glasses were filled and plates cleared without intruding on the guests' conversations. Yet even they seemed to sense the tension, their glances lingering a fraction too long on their employer. "Dinner will be served at 8, Sir Reginald announced, his voice carrying over the soft strains of a string quartet playing in the saloon, a feast to rival the finest in London, I assure you. And tomorrow we shall sail along the coast, weather permitting, of course." His eyes twinkled with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, and Hastings wondered if the man's bravado masked some deeper concern. Poirot, meanwhile, had retreated to a cushioned bench, his hands folded neatly over his stomach as he surveyed the deck. "Tell me, Hastings," he murmured, "what do you make of our host? Sir Reginald is a man who commands attention, yet I sense he is not entirely at ease. Observe the way he glances at his wife, then at Miss Grey. There is a story there, I think." Hastings frowned, following Poirot's gaze. "You're imagining things, old chap. He's just playing the gracious host. And Lady Evelyn, well, she's probably tired from organising all this." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Tired, perhaps, but it is not fatigue that makes her fingers tremble when she lifts her glass. Nan, there is something more. And Miss Greymark, her Hastings, she is too quiet, too watchful. The secretary who sees all and says nothing is a dangerous creature." Before Hastings could respond, a bell chimed, signalling the call to dinner. The guests began to move toward the saloon, their voices a murmur of anticipation. Poirot rose, brushing an imaginary speck from his sleeve. "Come, mon ami, let us dine and observe. The table, it is a stage where secrets are revealed in the smallest gestures, a glance, a hesitation, a word unspoken." The dining saloon was a vision of opulence, its long mahogany table set with silver and crystal that gleamed under the chandeliers. Light, the guests took their places, Sir Reginald at the head, Lady Evelyn to his right, and the others arranged with careful symmetry. Hastings found himself seated beside Miss Langley, whose sharp eyes seemed to dissect him as thoroughly as she did her characters. Poirot, opposite, maintained his air of detached curiosity, his fork poised with the precision of a surgeon. Conversation flowed easily at first, talk of the season's fashions, the latest London gossip, and the prospects for the yacht's coastal voyage. Yet Hastings noticed the undercurrents Poirot had hinted at, Clara Baxter's barbed remarks about Lady Evelyn's youth, Julian Trent's overly familiar smiles at Miss Grey, and Victor Crane's curt responses, as though he resented being there at all. Sir Reginald, for his part, dominated the table with tales of his business triumphs, but his laughter rang hollow, and more than once he cast a wary glance toward the saloon's door, as the main course roast pheasant with a Madeira sauce was served. Miss Langley leaned toward Hastings, her voice low. "Captain Hastings, you're a friend of that detective fellow, aren't you? Monsieur Poirot, I've heard he's frightfully clever. Do you think he'd mind if I put him in one of my novels?" Hastings chuckled, warming to her directness. "Oh, I dare say he'd be flattered, Miss Langley. Though he's rather particular about how he's portrayed. Likes to be seen as, well, unique." She raised an eyebrow, her pen tapping her notebook, which lay discreetly beside her plate. "I'll keep that in mind. Though, I must say, this party has the makings of a fine mystery. Too many secrets for one yacht, don't you think?" Before Hastings could reply, a sharp cry cut through the room. Lady Evelyn had risen, her hand clutching her throat, her face pale as the linen napkin she'd dropped. "Reginald," she gasped, her voice trembling. I heard something. A scream from the deck. The table fell silent, all eyes turning to Sir Reginald. He frowned, his hand tightening on his glass. "Nonsense, my dear. It's just the wind, or perhaps one of the crew. Mortimer runs a tight ship." But Lady Evelyn shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "No, it was a scream. I'm certain of it." Poirot set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, Sir Reginald, it would be prudent to investigate. The peace of mind, it is a valuable thing, Nan." Sir Reginald hesitated, then nodded. Curtly, "Very well. Mortimer," he signalled to the captain, who stood near the door. "Check the deck. Make sure everything's in order." The captain saluted and disappeared, his footsteps echoing in the sudden hush. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, the earlier gaiety replaced by a palpable tension. Hastings felt a prickle of unease, his soldier's instinct stirring. Poirot, however, remained serene, his eyes flicking from face to face as though cataloguing every reaction. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity. Then, from the deck above, came a shout, sharp, urgent, unmistakable. Captain Mortimer burst into the saloon, his face ashen, his scar stark against his pallor. "Sir Reginald," he said, his voice hoarse, "you'd better come. It's Miss Grey. She's dead." A collective gasp rose from the table. Lady Evelyn swayed, clutching her husband's arm. Clara Baxter let out a stifled scream, while Julian Trent's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Only Poirot remained still, his eyes narrowing as he murmured, "And so, it begins." Chapter 2. The crime. The saloon of the Sapphire yacht seemed to contract in the wake of Captain Mortimer's announcement. The air thick with shock and the acrid tints of spilled wine from Julian Trent's shattered glass. The chandelier's light, so warm and inviting moments before, now cast harsh shadows across the faces of the guests, each frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Miss Sylvia Grey, the unobtrusive secretary who had flitted among them with such quiet efficiency, was dead. The word hung like a storm cloud, ominous and unreal. Sir Reginald Haverford was the first to move, his chair scraping against the polished floor as he stood, his face a mask of authority strained by unease. "Dead," he repeated, his voice gruff. "What the devil do you mean, Mortimer? Explain yourself." Captain Mortimer, still pale, stood rigid at the saloon's entrance. "She's on the upper deck, sir, near the starboard railing. I found her just now. She's been stabbed, sir. There's blood, a great deal of it." A murmur of horror rippled through the guests. Lady Evelyn clutched her husband's arm, her sapphire gown trembling as she whispered, "Oh, Reginald, how could this happen?" Clara Baxter pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide, while Dr. Baxter, her husband, rose with a physician's instinct, his expression grim. Julian Trent, his boyish charm extinguished, stared at the table as though it held answers. Beatrice. Langley's pen, which had been poised over her notebook, now hovered motionless, her sharp gaze darting from face to face. Victor Crane, the solicitor, remained seated, his fingers still fidgeting, though now with a nervous intensity that suggested more than discomfort. Hercule Poirot, seated opposite Hastings, set his napkin down with deliberate care, his movements as precise as a clockmaker's. "Monsieur Mortimer," he said, his voice calm yet commanding, "you will please describe exactly what you saw. The details, they are of the utmost importance." Mortimer hesitated, his scarred cheek twitching. "I went to check the deck, as Sir Reginald ordered. It was dark, save for the deck lights. I found her lying near the railing, a knife in her chest, a small one, like a letter opener. She was already gone." Gone. Poirot's green eyes narrowed. "You are certain she was dead when you found her?" Mortimer nodded. "No pulse, no breathing. I've seen death before, sir. There's no mistaking it." Poirot inclined his head, his moustache twitching. "Slightly. And the time, monsieur?" "When did you find her?" Mortimer glanced at his watch. "Just past 8:15, sir. Dinner had only just started when Lady Evelyn heard the scream." Hastings, his heart pounding, leaned toward Poirot. "Good Lord, Poirot, this is grim. A murder, right here on the yacht. We must do something." Poirot raised a hand, silencing his friend with a gentle gesture. "Patience, mon ami. To act without thought is to chase shadows. We must first understand the stage upon which this tragedy has been played." Sir Reginald, his face flushed, barked. Mortimer secured the deck. "No one goes near the body until we sort this out. And summon the crew. Every man must account for his whereabouts." He turned to the guests, his tone authoritative. "We'll stay here until we know more. No one leaves the saloon." Clara Baxter's voice, sharp and trembling, cut through the tension. "Stay here, with a murderer among us. That's madness, Reginald. We should radio for the police at once." Dr. Baxter placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, his voice steady but strained. "Clara, please. Panicking won't help. Sir Reginald is right. We need order, order." Beatrice Langley's voice was cool, almost amused, as she closed her notebook with a snap. "A woman has been stabbed, and we're to sit here sipping champagne. This is a story I couldn't invent." Poirot's gaze flickered to her, a spark of interest in his eyes. "Mademoiselle Langley, you observe much. I think perhaps you have seen something tonight that others have missed." The novelist's lips curved into a faint smile. "I see everything, Monsieur Poirot, but I'm not in the habit of giving away my plot twists." Poirot nodded, undeterred, and rose from his seat. "With your permission, Sir Reginald, I should like to see the body, the scene of a crime. It speaks when one knows how to listen." Sir Reginald hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "You're a detective, aren't you?" "I've heard of you, Hercule Poirot, the Belgian fellow who solves impossible cases." "Very well, go, but don't touch anything. Mortimer, take him." Hastings followed Poirot and Mortimer out of the saloon, the weight of the guest's stares heavy on his back. The night air was cool as they ascended to the upper deck, the stars obscured by a gathering bank of clouds. The deck was eerily silent, save for the gentle creak of the yacht and the distant lapping of waves. A single lantern cast a pool of light near the starboard railing, where Miss Sylvia Grey lay crumpled, her plain grey dress stained with a dark, spreading pool of blood. Poirot knelt beside her, his movements precise, his eyes scanning every detail. The knife, as Mortimer had described, was a small, ornate letter opener, its silver handle gleaming in the lantern's glow. It protruded from her chest, just below her collarbone. Her face, pale and serene, bore no sign of struggle, her eyes, half open, staring blankly at the sky. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his voice soft with reverence. She was taken swiftly, I think. The wound is precise, too precise, perhaps, for a moment of passion. Hastings, standing a few paces back, felt a chill that had little to do with the night air. You mean it was planned, Poirot? A cold-blooded murder? Poirot did not answer immediately. He leaned closer, examining the deck around the body. His fingers hovered over a small object glinting near Miss Grey's hand, a single pearl earring, its luster marred by a speck of blood. He did not touch it, but noted its position with care. Curious, he said, almost to himself. A woman. Like Miss Grey, so discreet, so unadorned. Why an earring, and only one? Mortimer shifted uncomfortably. Could have been hers, sir, or maybe it fell off someone else. Poirot's eyes flicked to the captain. Perhaps, but in a crime. Monsieur, nothing is accidental. This earring, it is a clue, a deception, we shall see. Hastings glanced around the deck, his soldier's instincts urging him to act. Shouldn't we search the yacht, Poirot? The murderer can't have gone far. We're miles from shore. Poirot rose, brushing his hands together as though to dispel the grimness of the scene. Search, yes, but not with haste. The yacht, it is a closed circle, Hastings. Our murderer is still among us, and they will not escape the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. They returned to the saloon, where the guests sat in uneasy silence. Sir Reginald stood by the bar, pouring himself a brandy, while Lady Evelyn stared blankly at her untouched plate. Clara Baxter whispered urgently to her husband, who nodded absently. Julian Trent paced near the windows, his hands shoved into his pockets, while Victor Crane sat rigidly, his eyes fixed on the table. Beatrice Langley alone seemed composed, her notebook open again, her pen moving swiftly. Poirot took his seat, his expression serene but his eyes alive with calculation. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice cutting through the tension, a tragedy has occurred. Miss Sylvia Grey has been murdered. Until we reach port, we are all confined to this yacht. I shall investigate, and I assure you the truth will be found. But I must ask, where were each of you at 8 o'clock, when Lady Evelyn heard the scream? The question hung in the air, met with a chorus of uneasy glances. Sir Reginald spoke first, his tone defensive. We were all here, weren't we, at dinner, except the crew, of course. Poirot's moustache twitched. All of you, yet Miss Grey was not, and someone, perhaps, left the saloon briefly. A moment is all it takes, Nan. Clara Baxter's voice trembled. I was here, with Leonard. We didn't leave. Dr. Baxter nodded, as she says. We were at the table. Julian Trent stopped pacing, his face flushed. I stepped out for a cigarette just before dinner, but I was back by 8. You saw me, didn't you, Beatrice? Miss Langley raised an eyebrow. I saw you return, yes, but I wasn't watching. The clock. Victor Crane's voice was low, almost a growl. I was here, didn't move. Lady Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. I heard the scream, but I was here, with Reginald. Poirot's gaze lingered on each face, as though peeling back layers of deceit. And the crew, Monsieur Mortimer, where were your men? Mortimer stiffened. In the galley or at their posts, I'll have them questioned, sir. Poirot said, leaning back. We begin, then, with questions. But the answers, they will come from the details, the small things that betray the heart. Hastings, my friend, note the time, 8:15, the moment of discovery, and now we watch, we listen, and we think. Hastings nodded, his mind racing. The sapphire yacht, once a haven of luxury, was now a prison, its polished decks stained with blood and secrets. Chapter 3. The arrival. The atmosphere in the saloon of the sapphire yacht had thickened, as though the very air conspired to press the weight of Miss Sylvia Grey's murder upon the gathered guests. The clink of crystal and the murmur of conversation had ceased, replaced by a strained silence broken only by the occasional creak of the yacht's timbers and the distant lapping of waves against the hull. The guests, still seated around the mahogany table, avoided one another's eyes, each face a mask of shock, suspicion, or studied indifference. Hercule Poirot, however, sat with the calm of a man who had seen death before and knew its secrets could be unravelled with patience and precision. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near the saloon's entrance, felt his pulse quicken. The image of Miss Grey's body crumpled on the deck, the letter opener buried in her chest, the lone pearl earring glinting beside, Hurlingard in his mind like a grim photograph. He glanced at Poirot, whose green eyes were fixed on the guests, his fingers steepled before him as though in prayer. Hastings knew that look. It was the look of a mind at work, sifting through the chaos of human emotion to find the thread of truth. Sir Reginald Haverford, his brandy glass now empty, broke the silence with a gruff clearing of his throat. "This is intolerable," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man accustomed to command. "We can't just sit here like rats in a trap. Poirot, you're a detective, do something." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Mais oui, Sir Reginald, I am already doing something. I am observing the crime. It is fresh, and the murderer is among us. To act rashly is to risk the truth slipping through our fingers like sand." Lady Evelyn, her delicate hands twisting the sapphire silk of her gown, looked at Poirot with pleading eyes. "But what can you do, Monsieur Poirot? We're miles from shore, and Sylvia, poor Sylvia." Her voice broke, and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Poirot inclined, his head, his tone gentle but firm. "Madame, I assure you, Hercule Poirot does not require the resources of Scotland Yard to uncover the truth. The sapphire yacht is a small world, and in a small world, secrets cannot hide for long. But I must ask for your cooperation, all of you, the truth. It is built from details, and I will have them." Captain Mortimer, who had remained near the door, shifted uncomfortably. "I've secured the deck, sir, as you asked. The body's untouched, and the crew's been ordered to stay at their posts until you say otherwise." Poirot said, rising from his seat with a grace that belied the gravity of the moment. "Then let us begin. I shall examine the scene once more, and then I shall speak with each of you. Hastings, you will accompany me. Your eyes, they are honest, and they see what I may miss." Hastings nodded, though he felt a twinge of unease at the thought of returning to the deck. "Right, Poirot, lead on." As they left the saloon, Hastings caught a glimpse of Beatrice Langley's pen moving swiftly across her notebook, her eyes gleaming with a curiosity that bordered on relish. Clara Baxter whispered something to her husband, who shook his head curtly. Julian Trent resumed pacing, his hands still buried in his pockets. while Victor Crane's gaze followed Poirot with a mixture of suspicion and resentment. Sir Reginald poured himself another brandy, his movements deliberate, as though anchoring himself against the storm of events. The upper deck was bathed in the cold light of the lanterns, the sea beyond a dark, restless expanse. Miss Grey's body lay as they had left it, the letter opener's silver handle catching the light like a cruel mockery of the yacht's opulence. Poirot knelt beside her once more, his gloved hands hovering over the scene without touching. He studied the position of her arms, the angle of the knife, the precise placement of the pearl earring. "Curious, Hastings," he murmured. "The knife, it is not a weapon of opportunity, despite its appearance. A letter opener, yes, but one. Of fine craftsmanship, not the sort one carries casually. And the wound, see how clean it is, how direct. This was no frenzied attack." Hastings frowned, peering over Poirot's shoulder. "You mean it was premeditated? Someone planned this?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Precise. And the ear—" "It is not hers. Miss Grey wore no jewellery, not even a ring. This pearl, it belongs to another, or it was placed here to mislead." Hastings glanced around the deck, his mind racing. "But who could have done it, Poirot? We were all at dinner. Except," he hesitated, recalling the alibis given in the saloon, "except Julian Trent, who said he stepped out for a cigarette. And the crew, of course." Poirot rose, brushing his gloves together. "The crew, yes. We must speak with them. But first, let us consider the time. Lady Evelyn heard a scream at 8 o'clock, yes. And Mortimer found the body at 8:15. A narrow window, Hastings, but enough for a determined hand." They returned to the saloon, where Poirot announced his intention to interview the crew first. Captain Mortimer led them to the galley, where 3 crew members awaited. Jenkins, a wiry young steward with a nervous tic. O'Malley, a burly engineer with a thick Irish accent. And Peters, a deckhand with a quiet demeanour and calloused hands. Each man stood stiffly, their eyes flickering between Poirot and their captain, Messieurs. Poirot began, his voice smooth but authoritative. "A woman has been murdered. You will tell me where you were at 8 o'clock this evening, and you will be precise." Jenkins spoke first, his voice trembling. "I was in the galley, sir, preparing the desert trays. Didn't leave till after the scream." O'Malley nodded. "I was below, in the engine room, checking the fuel lines. Heard nothing till Mortimer called me up." Peters, the deckhand, met Poirot's gaze steadily. "I was on the lower deck, coiling ropes. Alone, sir, but I didn't go near the upper deck." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind cataloguing their responses. "And none of you saw Miss Grey after she left the saloon before dinner?" The 3 shook their heads, though Jenkins' tic seemed to quicken. Poirot made a mental note of it, his expression unreadable. "Very well, you will remain available. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself." Back in the saloon, Poirot turned his attention to the guests. "Mesdames et messieurs, I shall now speak with each of you privately. We will use the library, I think a quiet place for the little grey cells to work. Hastings, you will take notes." The library, a small but elegant room lined with leather-bound books and a single porthole, became Poirot's stage. He began with Sir Reginald, who entered with the air of a man unaccustomed to being questioned. "This is preposterous." "Poirot," Sir Reginald blustered, settling into a chair. "I was at dinner, as you saw. I had no reason to harm Sylvia. She was my secretary, efficient, loyal, a bit quiet perhaps, but indispensable." Poirot's gaze was steady, And yet, monsieur, you glanced at her often tonight. Was there something between you? A disagreement, perhaps? Sir Reginald's face reddened. Nothing of the sort. She handled my correspondence, my accounts. If I looked at her, it was to ensure everything was in order. Poirot nodded, his expression neutral. And at 8 o'clock, you were at the table? Yes, with Evelyn and the others. Ask anyone. Lady Evelyn was next, her delicate frame trembling as she sat. I don't know what happened, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sylvia was so unassuming. I can't imagine why anyone would do this. You heard a scream, madame, Poirot said gently. Can you describe it? She hesitated, her eyes darting to the porthole. It was sharp, like a cry of pain. I thought it came from the deck, but I couldn't be sure. Poirot noted the tremor in her voice, the way her fingers clutched her handkerchief. And your relationship with Miss Grey. You were close. Lady Evelyn's lips parted, then closed. She was Reginald's secretary. I barely knew her. Interviews continued, each guest offering a variation of the same story. They were at dinner. They saw nothing. They heard nothing. They heard nothing except for Lady Evelyn's scream. Julian Trent admitted to stepping out for a cigarette, but insisted he was. Back by 8, Beatrice Langley claimed to have been watching the guests, noting their interactions for her novel, but saw no one leave after Trent's return. Victor Crane was curt, repeating that he had not moved from his seat. Clara and Dr. Baxter corroborated each other's alibis, though Clara's nervous chatter suggested she was holding something back as the interviews concluded. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed. Hastings, he murmured, there is a pattern here, but it is not yet clear. The alibis, they are too perfect, too synchronized, and yet the scream, the earring, the knife, they tell a story. We must listen closely. Hastings, his notebook filled with scribbled details, felt a surge of frustration. But Poirot were no closer to knowing who did it. Everyone claims they were at the table. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Not everyone, mon ami, there is one who was not tanned, one who knows more than they say. Tomorrow we shall dig deeper. For now, let the murderer believe they are safe. It is when they feel safe that they make mistakes. As the yacht rocked gently on the waves, Hastings felt a chill. The sapphire yacht was a gilded cage, and somewhere within it, a killer waited. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The morning sun broke over the Cornish coast, its rays piercing the thin mist that clung to the sapphire yacht like a shroud. The vessel anchored a mile from the cliffs of St. Maur's, rocked gently, its polished decks now a stage for suspicion rather than splendor. In the aftermath of Miss Sylvia Grey's murder, the guests had retreated to their cabins, their sleep if any troubled by the knowledge that a killer walked among them. Hercule Poirot, however, had not slept. His mind, as precise as a Swiss watch, had been turning through the night, cataloguing every detail, every glance, every word spoken in the saloon. God Captain Arthur Hastings, bleary-eyed but resolute, joined Poirot in the yacht's library at precisely 9 o'clock. The room, with its leather-bound volumes and single porthole, felt smaller today, as though the weight of the crime had compressed the very walls. Poirot stood by the porthole, his silhouette framed against the sea, his hands clasped behind his back. His dinner jacket had been replaced by a pristine grey suit, his moustache immaculate as ever, but his eyes burned with a quiet intensity. "Hastings," he said, turning as his friend entered, "you look as though you have wrestled with Nightmares? Did the little grey cells keep you awake? Hastings managed a wry smile, settling into a chair with his notebook. Nightmares, Poirot? Hardly, just trying to make sense of it all. A woman stabbed, a pearl earring, a scream at 8. Everyone claims they were at dinner. It's a puzzle, all right. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. A puzzle, but one with pieces that fit, if only we arrange them correctly. Today, we question more deeply. The surface has been scratched. Now we must dig into the motives, the secrets, the lies that hide beneath. He gestured to a small table where a tray of coffee and croissants awaited, a touch of civility in the midst of chaos. But first, we fortify ourselves. The mind, it requires sustenance as much as the body. As they sipped their coffee, Poirot outlined his plan. We shall speak with each guest again, but this time we probe the heart. Motive, Hastings, it is the key. Miss Grey was not a random victim. She was chosen, and the reason lies in what she knew or what she was. We begin with Lady Evelyn, for her scream set this drama in motion. Hastings nodded, flipping open his notebook. Right, and after her, Sir Reginald. He seemed awfully defensive last night. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Sir Reginald, yes, but also Miss Langley. Her pen, it records more than she admits. And young Monsieur Trent, his cigarette break, it is too convenient. But first, Lady Evelyn. The interviews began promptly at 10, with Lady Evelyn entering the library with the hesitancy of a deer stepping into an open field. Her sapphire gown had been replaced by a simple cream dress, but the tightness around her eyes remained, accentuated by the pallor of her face. She sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, and met Poirot's gaze with a mixture of fear and resolve. Madame, Poirot began, his voice soft but probing. You heard a scream at 8 o'clock last evening, yet no one else did. Can you be certain of what you heard? Lady Evelyn's fingers tightened, her knuckles whitening. I know what I heard, Monsieur Poirot. It was sharp, like a cry of pain or fear. It came from the deck, I'm sure of it. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. And Miss Grey, how well did you know her? She was your husband's secretary, yet you said last night you barely knew her. Is this the truth? Her lips parted, then closed, as though weighing her words. She was efficient, quiet. Reginald relied on her for his business, affairs, letters, accounts, that sort of thing. I had no reason to know her closely. Poirot's moustache twitched. No reason, perhaps, but opportunity. Did you ever observe her with others? With your husband, perhaps, in a moment of familiarity? Lady Evelyn's cheeks flushed, and she looked away. I don't know what you mean, monsieur. Sylvia was professional. If there was anything more, I didn't see it. Poirot noted the hesitation, the slight tremor in her voice, but he pressed no further. Merci, madame. For now, that is all. As she left, Hastings whispered, She's hiding something, Poirot. Did you see how she avoided your question about Sir Reginald? Poirot nodded. Oui, mon ami. The heart betrays what the lips conceal. But we shall return to her. Now, let us have Sir Reginald. Sir Reginald entered with the bluster of a man determined to assert control. He settled heavily into the chair, his eyes narrowing at Poirot. I hope you're making progress, Poirot. This business is a damned nuisance. Sylvia was a good girl, replaceable, really. I can't fathom who'd want her dead. Poirot's expression remained serene. Monsieur, a woman like Miss Grey, discreet, efficient often, knows more than she reveals. Did she ever speak to you of troubles, of secrets she uncovered, perhaps, in her work? Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. Secrets? Nonsense. She handled my correspondence, my ledgers. Nothing out of the ordinary. If she knew anything dangerous, she never said. And your relationship with her? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. It was purely professional. Of course. It was, Sir Reginald snapped, his face reddening. What are you implying, man? Poirot raised a placating hand. I imply nothing, monsieur. I seek only the truth. You were at the table at 8 o'clock, yes. You saw nothing unusual before the scream. I was there, with Evelyn and the others. Nothing out of the ordinary until he broke off, his eyes flickering to the porthole, until she screamed. Poirot dismissed him with a nod, his mind already turning to the next interview. Beatrice Langley entered with a writer's poise, her notebook tucked under her arm, her eyes sharp with curiosity. Monsieur Poirot, she said, settling into the chair, this is quite the plot twist. I confess, I'm intrigued. Poirot's smile was faint but genuine. Mademoiselle, you are a student of human nature. Tell me, what did you observe? Last night, before the scream, Beatrice's lips curved. I observe everything, as you noted. Clara Baxter was flirting shamelessly with Julian Trent, though her husband pretended not to notice. Victor Crane was sullen, as usual, and Lady Evelyn seemed distracted, glancing at the door every few minutes. Sir Reginald was his usual bombastic self, but there was an edge to him, as though he were performing. And Miss Grey, Poirot prompted. Beatrice's pen tapped her notebook. She was there, then she wasn't. I saw her slip out before. Dinner, around 7:30. I'd say she didn't return. I assumed she was attending to some task for Sir Reginald. Poirot's eyes narrowed. 7:30. You are certain of the time? As certain as I am of a plot point, she replied, her tone dry. I make a habit of noting such things. The interviews continued, each guest offering fragments of the evening's events. Julian Trent admitted to his cigarette break, claiming he was on the lower deck from 7:45 to 7:55, alone. Clara Baxter insisted she and her husband had remained at the table, though her nervous chatter suggested otherwise. Dr. Baxter corroborated her story but seemed distracted, his clinical demeanour fraying. Victor Crane repeated his claim of never. Leaving his seat, his tone curt and unyielding. The crew, questioned again, added little. Jenkins the steward fidgeted as he repeated his alibi of preparing dessert trays. O'Malley, the engineer, maintained he was in the engine room, while Peters, the deckhand, insisted he was coiling ropes on the lower deck. Poirot listened to each, his expression unreadable, but Hastings sensed the wheels turning in his friend's mind. As the last interview concluded, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Hastings, what do we have? A scream at 8, a body found at 8:15, a letter opener, a pearl earring, and alibis that align too neatly. Yet there is one detail that troubles me. Hastings leaned forward, eager. What's that? Poirot, the earring, Poirot said softly. It is not Miss Grey's, and yet it was placed beside her. Why? To point to another? To distract? Or is it a mistake, a slip of the murderer's hand? Hastings frowned. But whose earring could it be? Lady Evelyn, Clara Baxter. Poirot's eyes gleamed. That, mon ami, we shall discover. For now, we return to the deck. There is more to see, I think. They ascended to the upper deck, where Miss Grey's body had been covered with a tarpaulin at Poirot's instruction. He knelt once more, examining the area around the body. His gloved hand paused over a faint smudge on the railing, barely visible in the daylight. Regard as Hastings. A mark grease, perhaps, or oil. Not from a lady's hand, I think. Hastings peered at it, his brow furrowing. One of the crew, maybe. O'Malley was in the engine room. Perhaps, Poirot said, rising. But we must not assume. The Sapphire Yacht is a small world, but its secrets are many. We shall uncover them, one by one. As they returned to the saloon, Hastings felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon him. The guests, the crew, the yacht itself all seemed to guard their truths jealously, but with Poirot's little grey cells at work, he knew the killer's mask would soon slip. Chapter 5. The red herrings, the Sapphire Yacht, lay still under the midday sun, its polished decks reflecting the light with a deceptive calm that belied the storm of suspicion brewing among its passengers. The murder of Miss Sylvia Grey had cast a pall over the vessel, transforming its luxurious confines into a gilded cage where every glance was laden with doubt. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the mounting tension, moved with the precision of a conductor, orchestrating his investigation with an eye for the subtlest discord in the human symphony before him. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library, with his notebook open, felt the weight of the case pressing upon him. The alibis, the pearl earring, the letter opener, the faint smudge on the railing all swirled in his mind, a jumble of clues that refused to cohere. Poirot, however, seemed unperturbed, his green eyes bright with the clarity of a man who saw patterns where others saw chaos. Hastings, Poirot said, pacing the small room with measured steps. We are at a delicate stage. The murderer, they believe they have covered their tracks, but in their haste, they have left footprints in the sand. Today, we shall stir the waters and see what rises to the surface. Hastings looked up, his pen poised. You mean to set a trap, Poirot? Flush out the killer? Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. Not a trap, mon ami, but a provocation. The guilty, they are like fish lured by the bait of their own guilt. We shall present a theory, a false scent, and observe who follows it. Before Hastings could press for details, a knock at the library door announced the arrival of Captain Mortimer. The weathered captain, his scar stark in the daylight, stood stiffly, his eyes wary. You wanted to see me again, Mr. Poirot? Oui, Monsieur Mortimer, Poirot said, gesturing to a chair. I wish to clarify certain details. The crew, they are your responsibility, yes. Tell me, did any of them have reason to dislike Miss Grey? Mortimer's jaw tightened. My men are professionals, sir. They don't mix with the guests, and Miss Grey kept to herself. If there was bad blood, I didn't know of it. Poirot's gaze was piercing, and yet a smudge of grease was found on the railing near the body, a smudge that suggests a hand. Accustomed to machinery. Your engineer, O'Malley, was in the engine room at 8 o'clock, was he not? Mortimer hesitated, his eyes flickering. He said he was. I've no reason to doubt him. Bon, Poirot said, dismissing him with a nod. But I shall speak with him myself. Send him in, if you please. As Mortimer left, Hastings whispered, You're not seriously suspecting O'Malley, are you? That smudge could be from anything, crewman's routine work. Perhaps Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The smudge, it is a detail, Hastings. Whether it points to O'Malley or another, it is too soon to say. But we shall use it to unsettle. O'Malley, the burly engineer, entered with a scowl, his hands shoved into the pockets of his work-stained jacket. "What's this about?" "Then," he asked, his Irish accent thick with defiance, "I told you I was in the engine room when it happened." Poirot leaned forward, his voice smooth but relentless. "Monsieur O'Malley, a smudge of grease was found near the body, a smudge that matches the oil used in the yacht's engines. You were in the engine room, yes, but can anyone confirm this?" O'Malley's face reddened. "I was alone, like I said. You'd think I'd stab a woman I barely knew. That's madness." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "But the grease, it is a fact, and facts, they do not lie. You will remain available, monsieur." As O'Malley stormed out, Hastings frowned. "You're pushing him hard, Poirot. Do you really think he's our man?" Poirot shook his head. "Nan, Hastings. O'Malley is a red herringa convenient suspect to draw the true killer's attention. The murderer, they will see us focus on the crew and believe their own trail is hidden. But we shall watch the guests closely." The day progressed with Poirot conducting further interviews, this time allowing whispers of suspicion to spread. He spoke with Jenkins, the nervous steward, whose tic grew more pronounced under questioning. Jenkins insisted he was in the galley, but his eyes darted to the door as though expecting rescue. Peters, the deckhand, remained calm, repeating his alibi of coiling ropes on the lower deck. Though Poirot noted the calluses on his hands, hands strong enough to wield a knife with precision. In the saloon, where the guests had gathered for lunch, the atmosphere was strained. Clara Baxter's laughter was forced, her eyes flitting to her husband, who ate in silence. Julian Trent, his boyish charm subdued, picked at his food, while Victor Crane's dure expression seemed etched in stone. Beatrice Langley, ever observant, scribbled in her notebook, her gaze lingering on Lady Evelyn, who sat pale and silent beside her husband. Sir Reginald, for his part, maintained a facade of authority, but his hands trembled slightly as he lifted his glass. Poirot, seated at the head of the table at Sir Reginald's insistence, seized the moment to cast his bait. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice carrying over the clink of cutlery, "I have made progress in our investigation. A clue, a smudge of grease on the railings, suggests the involvement of someone familiar with the yacht's machinery. The crew, they are being questioned closely." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Clara Baxter gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "The crew? You mean one of those men could have done it?" Dr. Baxter patted her hand, his voice calm but strained. "Now, Clara, let's not jump to conclusions. Monsieur Poirot knows what he's doing." Julian Trent's fork paused midway to his mouth. "Grease, that's specific. But surely, it could be from routine maintenance." Poirot's eyes flicked to him, noting the slight tremor in his voice. "Perhaps, Monsieur Trent, but in a murder, every detail is significant. Would you not agree, Mademoiselle Langley?" Beatrice Langley's pen paused, her smile sharp. "Oh, absolutely. Details are the lifeblood of a story. Though I must say, a smudge of grease seems rather ordinary for such a dramatic crime." Sir Reginald cleared his throat, his tone authoritative. "Enough speculation, Poirot. If you suspect the crew, what's next?" "We can't have a murderer running loose." Poirot inclined his head. "Patience, Sir Reginald. The truth, it reveals itself in time. For now, I ask that you all remain vigilant. The killer, they are clever, but not cleverer than Hercule Poirot." As lunch concluded, Hastings followed Poirot back to the library, his mind buzzing. "You're stirring things up, Poirot. That talk of the grease, everyone's on edge now." "Precisement," Poirot said, settling into a chair. "The guilty, they will grow nervous, Hastings. They will wonder if we are closer than we appear, and in their nervousness they will make a mistake." The afternoon brought a new development. Captain Mortimer, his face grim, approached Poirot with a small, sealed envelope. "Found this in Miss Grey's cabin, sir," he said, handing it over. It was tucked inside her writing desk. Poirot opened the envelope with care, revealing a single sheet of paper. The note, written in Miss Grey's neat hand, read, "I know what you've done. Meet me on the upper deck at 7:45. We must talk." Hastings' eyes widened. Good Lord, Poirot. She knew something worth killing for. Poirot's expression was grave. "Oui, mon ami. This note, it is the key. Miss Grey was not a random victim. She was a threat. But to whom was this note addressed? And why was it not delivered?" He folded the note carefully, tucking it into his pocket. "We must search her cabin further. There may be more clues to her secret." Miss Grey's cabin, a small but tidy space below deck, revealed little at first glance. Her belongings were sparse: a few plain dresses, a leather-bound diary, a set of pens. Poirot opened the diary, scanning its pages. Most entries were mundane notes on Sir Reginald's correspondence, reminders of appointments, but one, dated 2 days prior, caught his eye. "R. is hiding something. I saw the ledger. If I confront him, will he listen?" Hastings leaned over Poirot's shoulder. "That's got to be Sir Reginald, hasn't it? She found something in his accounts." Poirot closed the diary, his eyes narrowing. "Perhaps, but we must not leap to conclusions. The ledger, the note, the earring, they are pieces of a puzzle, and we lack the full picture." As they returned to the deck, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yacht. The guests, now scattered in small groups, watched Poirot with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Hastings felt the tension mounting, a storm gathering within the confines of the sapphire yacht. The red herrings had been cast, but the true killer remained hidden, their secret guarded by a web of lies. Poirot paused at the railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The net tightens, Hastings," he murmured. "Tomorrow we shall see who swims into it." Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The sapphire yacht rocked gently on the Cornish waves, its opulent facade a stark contrast to the grim reality of Miss Sylvia Grey's murder. The second day aboard had dawned with a heavy mist, cloaking the vessel, in an eerie stillness that mirrored the unease among its passengers. Hercule Poirot, ever the beacon of calm amidst chaos, stood on the upper deck, his gloved hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the spot where Miss Grey had met her end. The tarpaulin covering her body had been removed by Captain Mortimer's orders, and the scene was now cordoned off. But the bloodstain on the deck and the memory of the letter opener remained vivid in the minds of all who had seen it. Captain Arthur Hastings, trailing behind Poirot, felt a knot of frustration in his chest. The clues, the pearl earring, the grease smudge, the cryptic note found in Miss Grey's cabins seemed to point in every direction, and none. "Poirot," he said, his voice low, "we've got alibis, a note, and a smudge, but it's all a muddle. How do we make sense of it?" Poirot turned, his green eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. "Patience, mon ami. A puzzle is not solved by forcing the pieces, but by seeing their shape. Today we have found a clue, a small detail that speaks. loudly to the little grey cells. "Come, let us examine it closely." He led Hastings to the starboard railing, where the faint smudge of grease had been noted the previous day. In the daylight, it was barely visible, a faint sheen against the polished wood. But Poirot's attention was drawn not to the smudge itself, but to a tiny, overlooked detail nearby. A single thread, no longer than an inch, caught in a splinter of the railing. It was a pale blue, almost invisible against the wood, and it shimmered faintly in the mist. "Regard us, Hastings," Poirot said, pointing with a gloved finger. "This thread is not from Miss Grey's grey dress, nor from the attire of the crew. It is fine, delicate, like silk, and it is fresh, caught here since the murder." Hastings squinted, his brow furrowing. Silk that could be from one of the ladies' lady, Evelyn, perhaps, or Clara Baxter. Their gowns were silk, weren't they? Poirot's moustache twitched. "Perhaps, but we must not assume. The thread, it is a whisper of truth in a cacophony of lies. We shall keep it in mind as we continue." They returned to the library, where Poirot had arranged to re-examine Miss Grey's belongings, now brought from her cabin at his request. The leather-bound diary, the note, and a small leather case containing her pens and a few personal items lay on the table. Poirot opened the case, his fingers moving with surgical precision. Inside, nestled among the pens, was a small key, its brass surface tarnished but intact. Hastings leaned forward, his eyes widening. "A key. Do you think it's to something important? A safe, maybe?" Poirot held the key up to the light, turning it slowly. "Perhaps, Hastings. But a key is only as valuable as the lock it opens. We must discover what it protects or what it hides." He turned his attention to the diary, flipping to the entry that had caught his eye the previous day. "R is hiding something. I saw the ledger. If I confront him, will he listen?" Poirot's finger traced the words, his expression thoughtful. Miss Grey, she was no mere secretary. She saw something in Sir Reginald's ledger, something that made her a threat. Hastings nodded eagerly. "That must be it, Poirot. She found evidence of fraud or embezzlement, and Sir Reginald silenced her." Poirot raised a hand, his tone cautionary. "Nan Hastings, we do not leap to conclusions. The R could be Sir Reginald, yes, but it could also be another. We must consider all possibilities." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Beatrice Langley entered, her notebook under her arm, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone light but probing. "I hear you've been busy. Found anything interesting?" Poirot's smile was polite but guarded. "Mademoiselle Langley, your curiosity is as keen as your pen. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual about Miss Grey's behavior before she left the saloon on the evening of her death?" Beatrice settled into a chair, her expression thoughtful. She was quiet, as always, but there was a tension about her. She kept glancing at Sir Reginald, and once, when she thought no one was looking, she slipped a piece of paper into her pocket. I assumed it was a note for her work, but now she trailed off, her eyes narrowing. "You think it was that note you found?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You saw this, mademoiselle. At what time?" "Just before she left, around 7:30, Beatrice replied. "I make a habit of watching people, it's my trade, after all." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "And your own movements, mademoiselle?" "You were at the table at 8 o'clock. Yes, of course," she said, her smile unwavering. I never left. Too many interesting characters to observe. As Beatrice left, Hastings whispered, "She's sharp, Poirot. Do you think she's telling the truth?" "She tells the truth as she sees it," Poirot replied. "But the truth, it is like a prism, it changes with the angle of the light. We shall see." The next to be questioned was Clara Baxter, whose nervous energy filled the room as she entered, her hands fluttering like trapped birds. "Monsieur Poirot, this is all so dreadful," she said, her voice high and trembling. "I can't stop thinking about poor Sylvia. Who could do such a thing?" Poirot's tone was soothing but firm. "Madame Baxter, you were at the table when Lady Evelyn heard the scream, yes? Did you notice anything, perhaps a guest, who seemed distracted or uneasy?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the porthole. "Well, Julian Trent was fidgeting. You know, playing with his glass. And Victor Craney barely said a word all evening, just glowered. But I was with Leonard the whole time, I swear." Poirot noted the quickness of her response, the way her fingers twisted her handkerchief. "And Miss Grey, did you ever see her with an earring, a pearl earring, perhaps?" Clara's eyes widened. An earring? Oh, Sylvia never wore jewellery. She was far too plain for that. "But," she paused, her voice dropping, "I did lose a pearl earring the other day. I thought it was in my cabin, but perhaps it fell somewhere." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his eyes gleamed. "Most interesting, madame. And when did you last see this earring?" "2 days ago, I think," she said, her voice faltering. "I meant to ask the steward to look for it, but with all this..." Poirot dismissed her with a nod, turning to Hastings as the door closed. "The earring, Hastings, it belongs to Madame Baxter, or so she claims. But was it lost, or was it placed? This is the question." The interviews continued, each guest offering little new, but revealing much in their hesitations and glances. Julian Trent, questioned again about his cigarette break, grew defensive, insisting he saw no one on the lower deck. Victor Crane's answers were curt, his resentment palpable, while Dr. Baxter maintained his clinical calm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease when asked about his wife's earring. As the day waned, Poirot returned to the upper deck, where he stood by the railing, his gaze fixed on the spot where the thread had been found. Hastings joined him, the mist now lifting to reveal the distant cliffs of St. Maure's. "Poirot," he said, "that thread and the key, they're important, aren't they? But how do they fit with the note and the earring?" Poirot's voice was soft, almost a murmur. "They are threads in a tapestry, Hastings. The note tells us Miss Grey knew a secret. The key suggests she guarded something valuable. The earring points to another, perhaps Madame Baxter, perhaps not. And the thread..." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "The thread is a contradiction. It is too delicate for the crew, yet it was found where a murderer stood. We must find the dress or gown it came from." Hastings frowned, his mind racing. "But how? We can't search everyone's cabins, not without causing a scene." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "We shall not search, Hastings. We shall observe. Tonight, at dinner, I shall watch closely. The guilty, they will betray themselves in the smallest gesture, a glance, a hesitation, a thread caught in the wrong place." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yacht in a golden glow, Hastings felt a surge of anticipation. The clues were mounting, the net tightening. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, and the truth, though still hidden, was drawing closer with every detail uncovered. Chapter 7. More lies surfaced. The sapphire yacht lay cloaked in the twilight of the Cornish coast. Its elegant silhouette a stark contrast to the undercurrents of deceit that swirled among its passengers. The murder of Miss Sylvia Grey had transformed the vessel into a crucible of suspicion, where every word and glance was scrutinized for hidden meaning. Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, stood at the heart of the investigation, his mind weaving together the threads of clues: the pearl earring, the grease smudge, the blue silk thread, the cryptic note, and the small brass key into a pattern that was beginning to take shape. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the yacht's library, felt the weight of the case pressing upon him. The interviews, the alibis, the subtle contradictions, they were a labyrinth, and only Poirot seemed to navigate it with ease. As the dinner hour approached, Hastings sensed a shift in the air, a mounting tension that promised revelations. Poirot, immaculate in his evening attire, stood by the porthole, his green eyes reflecting the fading light. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low but resonant, "tonight we shall see the masks slip. The guilty, they grow restless when the net tightens. We have planted seeds of doubt with our talk of grease and earrings. Now we shall water them with questions and watch what grows." Hastings nodded, his notebook open on the table. "You're sure the killer will slip up, Poirot? They've been careful, so far too careful, if you ask me." Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Careful, oui, but not perfect. The human heart, it betrays itself in the smallest ways. A word, a gesture, a lie that contradicts another. Tonight, we probe deeper." The dinner saloon was a study in forced civility. The guests arranged around the mahogany table with a veneer of politeness that cracked under the strain of suspicion. Sir Reginald Haverford, at the head, maintained his authoritative air, though. His eyes darted to the door as though expecting an interruption. Lady Evelyn, pale and fragile in a cream gown, picked at her food, her fingers trembling. Clara Baxter's laughter was brittle, her gaze flitting between her husband and Julian Trent, who sat with a forced nonchalance, his boyish charm dimmed. Victor Crane, dour as ever, ate in silence, his hands clenched around his cutlery. Beatrice Langley, her notebook discreetly tucked beside her plate, observed the scene with a novelist's intensity, her pen poised like a weapon. Poirot, seated opposite Hastings, took command of the conversation with the ease of a maestro. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice cutting through the clink of crystal, "the investigation progresses. We have found a note in Miss Grey's cabina, note that suggests she knew a secret, one worth killing for. I wonder, has anyone here received such a note?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of unease through the room. Sir Reginald's fork paused, his face reddening. "A note? What nonsense is this, Poirot? Sylvia was my secretary. She had no business writing notes about secrets." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his tone deceptively mild. "And yet, monsieur, the note exists. It reads, 'I know what you've done. Meet me on the upper deck at 7:45. To whom was it addressed? Perhaps you can enlighten us." Sir Reginald's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Clara Baxter gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "A note? That's dreadful. You don't think it was meant for one of us, do you?" Dr. Baxter patted her hand, his voice calm but strained. "Clara, don't excite yourself. Monsieur Poirot is merely exploring possibilities." Julian Trent leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Possibilities? It sounds like you're accusing someone at this table, Poirot." "I was out for a cigarette at 7:45. but I didn't see Sylvia or any note. Poirot's gaze flicked to him, noting the defensiveness in his tone. And yet, Monsieur Trent, you were on the lower deck, alone, at a time very close to the murder. A coincidence, perhaps. Trent's face flushed. I told you, I didn't see her. I was back by 8, as Beatrice can confirm. Beatrice Langley's smile was cool, her pen tapping her notebook. I saw you return, Julian, but I didn't check the time. You were rather flushed, though nervous, perhaps. Trent glared at her, but before he could retort, Lady Evelyn spoke, her voice barely audible. I received no note. But Sylvia, she was always watching, always listening. She knew things about everyone. The table fell silent, all eyes turning to Lady Evelyn. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. What things, madame? Did she know something about you? Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. No, I mean. She was Reginald's secretary. She saw his papers, his letters. If she knew anything, it was about his business. Sir Reginald slammed his glass down, the sound startling in the quiet. That's enough, Evelyn. Sylvia was loyal. If she had concerns, she'd have come to me. Poirot's eyes gleamed, catching the crack in Sir Reginald's composure. Loyal, oui, but perhaps too curious. Her diary mentions a ledger, monsieur. A ledger that troubled her. What was in it? Sir Reginald's face darkened, but he held Poirot's gaze. My ledgers are private, Poirot. Sylvia handled routine accounts. Nothing more. If she wrote about a ledger, she was mistaken. The tension in the room was palpable, a web of unspoken accusations. Victor Crane, who had been silent, suddenly spoke, his voice low and bitter. Ledgers, notes, secret sounds, like someone was prying where they shouldn't. Maybe Sylvia got what she deserved. A collective gasp rose from the table. Clara Baxter's eyes widened, while Dr. Baxter frowned, his clinical calm fraying. Beatrice Langley's pen scratched furiously, capturing the moment. Poirot's gaze locked onto Crane, his voice sharp. Monsieur Crane, you speak with venom. Did Miss Grey pry into your affairs as well? Crane's lips twisted into a sneer. She was a nosy little thing, always hovering. I didn't trust her, but I didn't kill her, if that's what you're thinking. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. We shall see, monsieur. The truth, it has a way of surfacing, like oil on water. As dinner concluded, Poirot requested a private word with Captain Mortimer. In the library, the captain stood stiffly, his scar stark against his weathered face. What now, Mr. Poirot? He asked, his tone wary. Poirot held up the small brass key from Miss Grey's belongings. This key, Monsieur Mortimer, do you know what it opens? Mortimer's eyes flickered, but he shook his head. Could be anything: a desk, a safe, a locker. I'd have to check the ship's inventory. Do so, Poirot said, his voice firm. And tell me, did any of your crew have dealings with Miss Grey? A conversation, perhaps, or a disagreement? Mortimer hesitated, then said, Jenkins. Mentioned she asked him about the cruise schedules a few days ago. Said she was organizing something for Sir Reginald. I thought nothing of it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Most interesting. Bring Jenkins to me. The nervous steward entered, his tic more pronounced than ever. Sir, I swear I didn't do anything, he blurted before Poirot could speak. I was in the galley, like I said. Poirot raised a hand, his voice soothing. Calm yourself. Monsieur Jenkins, tell me of Miss Grey's questions about the cruise schedules. What did she want to know? Jenkins swallowed, his eyes darting to the door. She asked who was on duty when, and if anyone left the yacht at port. I told her it was just routine. Nobody left except for supplies. She seemed anxious, like she was looking for something. Poirot dismissed him with a nod, turning to Hastings as the door closed. Anxious, Hastings. Miss Grey was searching for something or someone. The ledger, the note, the questions to Jenkins. They point to a secret she uncovered, a secret worth her life. Hastings frowned, his mind racing. But whose secret? Sir Reginald's, Crane's, or someone else entirely? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. That mon ami is the question. The lies are surfacing like bubbles in a glass. The ledger suggests financial deceit, the note a confrontation, the earring a connection to Madame Baxter or a deception. And the blue silk thread. He paused, his eyes gleaming. Tonight I observed the gowns. Lady Evelyn's was cream, Madame Baxter's was green, but Mademoiselle Langley wore a pale blue silk shawl. Hastings' eyes widened. Beatrice, you think she's involved? Poirot shook his head. I think nothing yet, Hastings. But the thread, it is a clue that does not lie. We must watch her closely. As the yacht settled into the night, the guests dispersed to their cabins, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. Hastings felt the weight of the mystery deepening, the lies piling upon one another like driftwood on a shore. But with his unyielding logic, was closing in, his little grey cells weaving a net that would soon ensnare the truth. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The sapphire yacht lay enshrouded in the stillness of the Cornish night, its polished decks reflecting the faint glow of lanterns as the sea whispered secrets against its hull. The murder of Miss Sylvia Grey had cast a shadow over the vessel, transforming its luxurious confines into a crucible where fear and suspicion simmered. Hercule Poirot, with his meticulous mind and unerring instinct, stood at the centre of the storm, his little grey cells sifting through the web of clues: the pearl earring, the grease smudge, the blue silk thread, the cryptic note, and the small brass key. Each piece was a fragment of truth, but the whole remained elusive, like a melody half heard in the wind. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the yacht's library, felt the weight of the investigation pressing upon him. The alibis, the contradictions, the mounting lies, they were a labyrinth. And though Poirot navigated it with confidence, Hastings sensed a shift in the air. The guests, once cloaked in polite facades, were beginning to crack under the strain, their emotions betraying what their words concealed. Poirot stood by the porthole, his silhouette sharp against the darkened sea. "Hastings," he said, his voice low and measured, "we approach a turning point. The guilty, they are like a violin string stretched a tight one pluck, and they will snap. Tonight we shall apply pressure, and someone will break." Hastings looked up from his notebook, his brow furrowed. "You mean to confront them, Poirot? Push them until they confess?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Not a confession, mon ami, but a revelation. The heart, it speaks when the mind falters. We have stirred the waters with our talk of Greece and earrings, and now we shall cast a new stone. The note, its existence troubles someone deeply." Before Hastings could respond, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Captain Mortimer. The captain's scarred face was grim, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Mr. Poirot," he said, "I've checked the ship's inventory for that key you found. It doesn't match any lock on the yacht, none of the safes, lockers, or cabins." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his fingers closing round a small brass key. Curious, Monsieur Mortimer. A key with no lock suggests a secret hidden elsewhere, perhaps on shore, or in Miss Grey's past. You have done well. Now, tell me, have you noticed any change in your crew's behavior since the murder? Mortimer hesitated, his gaze flickering. Jenkins has been jumpy, more than usual, keeps to himself, avoids the others. I thought it was just nerves, but Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Merci, monsieur. Keep watch on him. The nervous, they often know more than they say. As Mortimer left, Hastings whispered, Jenkins again, Poirot. That tick of his, it's like a signal. Do you think he's hiding something? Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice soft. But we must not be distracted by the obvious. The steward's nerves may be guilt, or they may be fear. We shall see. The evening brought the guests together in the saloon for dinner, a ritual, now fraught with tension. The chandelier's light cast harsh shadows, illuminating faces etched with strain. Sir Reginald Haverford, at the head of the table, gripped his glass with a force that belied his outward calm. Lady Evelyn, beside him, was a ghost in her pale gown, her eyes downcast. Clara Baxter's chatter was subdued, her glances darting. To her husband, who ate with mechanical precision, Julian Trent, his boyish charm frayed, fidgeted with his cutlery, while Victor Crane's due silence seemed to radiate resentment. Beatrice Langley, her notebook open, scribbled with an intensity that suggested she was capturing more than mere observations. Poirot, seated opposite Hastings, seized the moment to apply his pressure. Madame et messieurs, he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. A new clue has come to light. The note found in Miss Grey's cabin. I know what you've done. Meet me on the upper deck at 7:45 was not delivered, but it was written with purpose. Miss Grey knew a secret, one that threatened someone at this table. I wonder who among you feared her knowledge. The room froze, the clink of cutlery silenced. Sir Reginald's face reddened, his voice sharp. This is outrageous, Poirot. You're accusing us without evidence. Sylvia was my secretary. She had no secrets from me. Poirot's gaze was steady. And yet, monsieur, her diary speaks of a ledger that troubled her. Was it yours, perhaps, or another's? Lady Evelyn's hand trembled, her glass slipping to the table with a clatter. Reginald, tell him it's not true, she cried, her voice breaking. Sylvia couldn't have known anything. Not about you. The outburst stunned the room. Sir Reginald's face drained of colour, his eyes darting to his wife. Evelyn, what are you saying? You know nothing of my business. Lady Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, her voice a whisper. I saw her, Reginald, 2 nights ago in your study. She was looking through your papers, and you were angry. I didn't want to believe it, but she knew something, didn't she? The table erupted in murmurs. Clara Baxter gasped, her hand clutching her husband's arm. Julian Trent's fork clattered to his plate, his face pale. Victor Crane's lips twisted into a sneer, while Beatrice Langley's pen scratched furiously, her eyes gleaming with interest. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos, calm but commanding. Madame Haverford, you saw this. At what time, and what did you hear? Lady Evelyn's hands twisted her napkin, her voice trembling. It was late after midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the study to find Reginald. Sylvia was there, alone, with the ledger open. When Reginald came in, He shouted at her, told her to leave his papers alone. She said, "I know what you're doing, and I won't stay silent." I left before they saw me. Sir Reginald slammed his fist on the table, his voice thunderous. "That's a lie, Evelyn. Yes, I caught Sylvia in my study, but it was a misunderstanding. She was checking figures for a shipment, nothing more." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his tone deceptively mild. "A misunderstanding, monsieur. Yet Miss Grey wrote of a ledger that troubled her, and 2 days later she is dead. A coincidence? Perhaps." The room fell silent, the weight of Lady Evelyn's revelation hanging heavy. Hastings, his heart pounding, scribbled in his notebook, his eyes darting between the guests. Sir Reginald's anger, Lady Evelyn's tears, the others' shocked expressions. It was as though a dam had broken, releasing a flood of hidden truths. Beatrice Langley spoke, her voice cool and measured. "Well, that's quite a scene, Lady Evelyn. You've painted Sir Reginald as a villain in your little drama. But what about you? Why were you creeping around the study at midnight?" Lady Evelyn's face crumpled, her voice a sob. "I wasn't creeping. I was worried about Reginald. He's been so distant, so secretive. I thought he was hiding something from me." Clara Baxter's voice was sharp, her eyes blazing. "Hiding something, like an affair, perhaps. Sylvia was always hovering around him. Maybe you were jealous, Evelyn." Dr. Baxter gripped his wife's arm, his voice low. "Clara, that's enough. You're upsetting her." Poirot's gaze swept the table, noting every reaction. "Jealousy, Madame Baxter. An interesting theory. And you, Monsieur Trentior. Cigarette break at 7:45 places you near the time of the murder. Did you see Sir Reginald or Miss Grey on the deck?" Trent's face flushed, his voice defensive. "I told you, I was on the lower deck, alone. I didn't see anyone." Victor Crane's sneer deepened. "Convenient, Trent. You're always slipping away, aren't you? Maybe you were the one Sylvia was meeting." Trent shot to his feet, his chair scraping. "That's a lie, Crane. I had no reason to hurt her." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but authoritative. "Enough, messieurs. The accusations, they fly like arrows, but they miss the mark. The truth lies in the details, the note, the ledger, the blue silk thread. And I assure you, it will be found." As dinner ended, the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. Lady Evelyn's revelation had cracked the facade of civility, exposing raw emotions and hidden motives. In the library, Poirot turned to Hastings, his eyes gleaming. "You see, mon ami, the heart speaks when the mind falters. Lady Evelyn's words have shaken the guilty, and now they will act." Hastings frowned, his mind racing. "You think Sir Reginald's the killer, don't you? That ledger—it's got to be the key." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The ledger, oui, but it is not the only key. The blue silk thread, the pearl earring, the note, they weave a tapestry of deceit. And Lady Evelyn's tears they are. Not only for her husband, I think." As the yacht settled into the night, Hastings felt the mystery deepening, the lies surfacing like wreckage from a sunken ship. Poirot's net was tightening, and someone, he knew, was about to break. Chapter 9. The Trapther Sapphire yacht lay anchored under a starless sky, its polished decks shrouded in a darkness that mirrored the secrets festering among its passengers. The murder of Miss Sylvia Grey had unravelled the veneer of civility aboard, and Lady Evelyn's tearful revelation at dinner had set the stage for a new act in the drama. Hercule Poirot, with his meticulous mind and unyielding logic, sensed the moment was ripe to tighten the net around the killer. The clues: a pearl earring, the grease smudge, the blue silk thread, the cryptic note, and the small brass key were aligning, and Poirot was ready to apply the psychological pressure that would force the guilty to betray themselves. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing in the yacht's library, felt a surge of anticipation. Lady Evelyn's outburst had exposed a fracture in the group's facade, and the raw emotions it unleashed: Sir Reginald's anger, Clara Baxter's accusations, Julian Trent's defensiveness, had left the guests reeling. Poirot, immaculate in his grey suit, stood by the porthole, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a hunter closing in on his prey. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low and deliberate, "we have stirred the waters, and the fish are restless. The note, the ledger, the earring, they have unsettled the guilty. Tonight we shall set a trap, not with force, but with the power of suggestion. The murderer, they will reveal themselves by their actions." Hastings, his notebook open, frowned. "A trap, Poirot? You mean to gather everyone and confront them? But won't that just make them clam up?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Nan, mon ami, the trap is not an accusation, but an opportunity. We shall create a moment where the guilty feel safe to act, to cover their tracks or to strike again. And in that moment, they will betray themselves." Before Hastings could press for details, a knock at the door announced Captain Mortimer. The captain's scarred face was taut, his eyes shadowed with unease. "Mr. Poirot, I've questioned the crew again, as you asked. Jenkins is still nervous, keeps muttering about Miss Grey's questions. O'Malley swears he was in the engine room, and Peters says he was on the lower deck. Nothing new, I'm afraid." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Mercy, Monsieur Mortimer. But there is one thing more. The small brass keyhab, you searched Miss Grey's cabin again for any lock it might fit?" Mortimer shook his head. "Nothing, sir. No safe, no locked drawer. It's a mystery," Bon Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Then we must look beyond the yacht. For now, prepare the saloon for a gathering after dinner. I wish to address the guests." As Mortimer left, Hastings whispered, "You're planning something big, aren't you? What's the trap?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Patience, Hastings, you shall see. But first, we must visit Miss Grey's cabin once more. The key, it troubles me. It is a clue that does not yet fit." Miss Grey's cabin, small and austere, yielded little at first glance. Her plain dresses hung neatly in the wardrobe, her desk bare save for a few pens and a blotter. Poirot examined the desk closely, his gloved fingers tracing its edges. He paused at a faint scratch on the underside, barely visible. With a small tool from his pocket, he pried open a hidden compartment, revealing a single folded letter. Hastings leaned forward, his heart racing. "Good Lord, Poirot, another note." Poirot unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning its contents. It was written in Miss Grey's neat hand, addressed to no one, and read, "If anything happens to me, look to the ledger in R.S. study. The numbers do not lie." Hastings' eyes widened. "It's Sir Reginald, isn't it? The ledger, she was going to expose him." Poirot folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket. "Perhaps, Hastings. But the ledger, it is not the whole story. We must see it for ourselves. Tonight we shall arrange for the study to be left unguarded." Hastings frowned, puzzled. Unguarded? But won't that risk someone tampering with it? "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice soft. "That is the trap. Dinner was a tense affair. The guests gathered in the saloon under the chandelier's unforgiving light. Sir Reginald, his face still flushed from the previous night's confrontation, ate in silence, his eyes avoiding his wife. Lady Evelyn, pale and fragile, picked at her food, her hands trembling. Clara Baxter's chatter was forced, her glances darting to Julian Trent, who sat with a strained smile. Victor Crane's dour expression was unchanged, his fingers clenched around his glass. Beatrice Langley, her notebook open, scribbled with a quiet intensity, her eyes flicking from face to face. Poirot, seated at the head of the table, waited until the dessert course to make his move. "Madame et messieurs," he said, his voice commanding attention. "The investigation into Miss Grey's murder draws closer to its conclusion. We have found a letter hidden in her cabin that speaks of a ledger that holds a secret worth killing for. Tonight I shall examine Sir Reginald's study, where this ledger is kept. But I warn you, the guilty among you will not sleep easily." A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Sir Reginald's fork clattered to his plate, his face darkening. "My study. You've no right to pry into my private affairs, Poirot." Poirot's gaze was steady. "A woman is dead, monsieur. Privacy is a luxury we cannot afford. The ledger will be examined, with or without your consent." Lady Evelyn's hand flew to her throat, her voice a whisper. "Reginald, tell him it's nothing. Tell him there's no secret." Sir Reginald's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes burning with suppressed anger. Clara Baxter's voice was sharp, her eyes wide. A ledger? What kind of secret? Was Sylvia blackmailing someone? "Doctor—" Baxter patted her hand, his voice calm but strained. "Clara, let Monsieur Poirot do his work. Speculation won't help." Julian Trent leaned forward, his voice tense. "If there's a ledger, let's see it. If Sir Reginald's hiding something, we all have a right to know." Victor Crane's sneer was venomous. "Hiding something? That's rich, coming from you, Trent. You're the one who was skulking around the deck when she died." Trent's face flushed, his chair scraping as he stood. "I've had enough of your accusations, Crane." Poirot raised a hand, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Enough, messieurs. The ledger will speak for itself. For now, I ask you to retire to your cabins. The study will be examined at 10 o'clock." As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Now, mon ami, we set the stage. I have informed Mortimer that the study will be left unguarded until 10. The guilty, they will seize this chance to act to destroy the ledger, or to plant a false clue." Hastings' eyes widened. "You're letting them tamper with evidence." "That's risky, Poirot. Risky, oui, but necessary," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The murderer will move, and we shall be watching." At 9:30, Poirot and Hastings positioned themselves in a shadowed alcove near Sir Reginald's study. A small room below deck lined with books and a heavy oak desk. The door was ajar, the room dark save for a single lamp. Poirot's eyes were fixed on the corridor, his breathing steady, his senses alert. Minutes passed, the yacht's gentle rocking the only sound. Then a soft footfall echoed in the corridor, and a figure appeared, cloaked in shadow. The figure hesitated, then slipped into the study, their movements swift but cautious. Hastings held his breath, his hand tightening on his notebook. The figure approached the desk, their hands fumbling with the drawers. A faint rustle of paper followed, then a muffled curse. Poirot stepped forward, silent as a cat, and flicked on the light. Bonsoir, he said, his voice calm but commanding. May I assist you? The figure spun around, revealed to be Julian Trent, his face pale, his hands clutching a folder. Poirot, I was just what, Monsieur Trent? Poirot asked, his eyes narrowing. Searching for the ledger, or perhaps destroying it. Trent's hands trembled, the folder slipping to the floor. I wasn't destroying anything. I wanted to see it. Sylvia told me something was wrong with Sir Reginald's accounts. I thought if I could find proof. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. Proof, monsieur? Or were you ensuring no proof remained? You were on the deck at 7:45, were you not? Near the time of Miss Grey's death. Trent's voice cracked, his eyes wild. I didn't kill her, I swear it. I was curious, that's all. Hastings stepped forward, his voice firm. Curious enough to sneak into the study, Trent. That doesn't look good. Poirot raised a hand, his expression thoughtful. We shall see, Monsieur Trent. For now, you will return to your cabin. The folder, it stays with me. As Trent left, his shoulders slumped. Poirot opened the folder, revealing a series of financial documents. Hastings, he said, the trap has caught a fish, but is it the right one? The ledger, it will tell us more. But I suspect the true killer is watching, waiting for their moment. The night deepened, the yacht, a cauldron of secrets. Poirot's trap had sprung, but the true killer remained elusive, their next move hidden in the shadows. Chapter 10. The reveal. The sapphire yacht lay cloaked in the stillness of the Cornish night. Its elegant silhouette a silent witness to the unravelling drama within. The murder of Miss Sylvia Grey had transformed the vessel into a stage where secrets, lies, and motives collided, and Hercule Poirot, with his unerring logic and keen insight, stood ready to draw the curtain on the mystery. The trap set in Sir Reginald's study had ensnared Julian Trent, caught rifling through the desk, but little grey cells were not yet satisfied. The clues, the pearl earring, the grease smudge, the blue silk thread, the cryptic note, the brass key, and now the ledger were pieces of a puzzle that demanded a final, brilliant arrangement. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the yacht's library, felt a surge of anticipation. The confrontation with Trent had been a dramatic turn, but Poirot's calm demeanour suggested there was more to come. The folder Trent had clutched, now spread across the table, contained financial documents, marked with Sir Reginald's meticulous handwriting, but also with annotations in Miss Grey's neat script. Hastings' heart raced as he sensed the climax approaching. Poirot stood by the porthole, his hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes reflecting the faint glow of the lantern outside. Hastings, he said, his voice steady but charged. With purpose, the moment has come. The guilty have been lulled by our trap, believing their tracks covered. But tonight, we shall gather all in the saloon and reveal the truth. The ledger, it speaks, and the little grey cells, they have listened. Hastings leaned forward, his notebook open. You've solved it, haven't you, Poirot? Was it Trent or Sir Reginald? That ledger, it must be the key. Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. The ledger, but it is not the whole story. Come, mon ami, let us prepare. The stage is set, and the players await their cue. The saloon was a tableau of tension as the guests assembled at Poirot's request. The chandelier cast its unforgiving light, illuminating faces etched with fear, suspicion, and exhaustion. Sir Reginald Haverford sat at the head, his jaw set, his eyes burning with defiance. Lady Evelyn, beside him, was a shadow of herself, her cream gown clinging to her trembling frame. Clara Baxter's nervous chatter was silenced, her hands twisting. Her napkin, Dr. Baxter, ever the calm physician, watched with clinical detachment, though his eyes betrayed unease. Julian Trent, pale and dishevelled from his encounter in the study, sat with his head bowed. Victor Crane's dure expression was a mask of resentment, while Beatrice Langley, her notebook open, observed with a novelist's intensity, her pen poised. Poirot stood at the centre, his diminutive figure commanding the room. "Madame et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and resonant, "a tragedy has unfolded on this yacht. Miss Sylvia Grey, a woman of quiet efficiency, was murdered with a letter opener on the upper deck. But the question is not only who killed her, but why. Tonight, Hercule Poirot shall reveal the truth." A murmur rippled through the room, quickly silenced by Poirot's raised hand. "Let us begin with the clues. A pearl earring found beside the body belonging to Madame Baxter. A smudge of grease on the railing, suggesting a hand accustomed to machinery. A blue silk thread caught in a splinter from a delicate garment. A note hidden in Miss Grey's cabin. I know what you've done. Meet me on the upper deck at 7:45. A brass key with no lock to fit, and a ledger annotated by Miss Grey, revealing a secret worth killing for." Sir Reginald's face reddened. "Enough of this, Poirot. My ledgers are private. You've no right to drag them into this." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "Your ledgers, monsieur, tell a story of deceit. Miss Grey discovered discrepancies funds siphoned from your shipping company, disguised as routine expenses. She confronted you, did she not, 2 nights before her death?" Lady Evelyn gasped, her hand clutching her husband's arm. "Reginald, is this true?" Sir Reginald's voice was a growl. "It's nonsense. Sylvia made a mistake. There was no theft." Poirot turned to the ledger, open on the table. "None, monsieur. The annotations in Miss Grey's hand are clear. She found evidence of embezzlement sums transferred to an account under a false name. She wrote in her diary, 'R is hiding something. If I confront him, will he listen?' And in her letter, hidden in her desk, 'If anything happens to me, look to the ledger in R's study.'" Clara Baxter's voice was sharp. "So it was Sir Reginald. He killed her to keep her quiet." Poirot shook his head. "Patience. Madame, the ledger points to a motive, but not the murderer. Let us consider the time. Lady Evelyn heard a scream at 8 o'clock, and the body was found at 8:15. Monsieur Trent, you were on the lower deck at 7:45. Yes. Alone, smoking. A cigarette." Trent's face flushed, his voice defensive. "I've told you, I didn't see her. I was back by 8. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, you were caught tonight in Sir Reginald's study, searching for the ledger. Why, monsieur? To destroy evidence of your own involvement." Trent's hands trembled. "I told you, Sylvia hinted at something wrong with the accounts. I wanted to see for myself." Poirot turned to the group. "But there is another clue, blue silk thread, found on the railing. It is not from Miss Grey's grey dress, nor from Madame Baxter's green gown, nor from Lady Evelyn's cream. But Mademoiselle Langley, you wore a pale blue silk shawl." That evening, Beatrice Langley's pen paused, her smile cool. "A thread, Monsieur Poirot. That's hardly evidence. My shawl could have caught anywhere on the yacht." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but let us consider the earring. Madame Baxter, you lost a pearl earring 2 days before the murder, yet it was found beside Miss Grey's body. A coincidence, or a plant?" Clara Baxter's eyes widened. I told you, I lost it. Someone must have taken it. Poirot nodded, his voice soft but piercing. Someone, we. And now, the grease smudge. It suggests a hand familiar with machinery perhaps. Monsieur O'Malley, the engineer, or Monsieur Jenkins, whose nervousness betrays him. But the smudge, it is a distraction, meant to point to the crew. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The truth, it lies in the note. I know what you've done. Miss Grey was no mere secretary. She uncovered Sir Reginald's embezzlement. But she also knew another secreter, personal one. Lady Evelyn, you saw her in the study with your husband, yes. But you also saw something else, did you not? Lady Evelyn's face crumpled, her voice a sob. I saw her with Julian, 2 days before, on the lower deck. They were whispering, and she looked afraid. I thought they were having an affair. Trent shot to his feet, his face pale. That's a lie. Sylvia and I were friends. Nothing more. She told me about the ledger, said she was going to confront Sir Reginald. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And so, we come to the heart of it. The murderer is not Sir Reginald, nor Monsieur Trent, nor the crew. The killer is one who knew Miss Grey's secret, who feared her knowledge, and who used the earring to cast suspicion on Madame Baxter. He turned to Victor Crane, whose dear silence had been a constant presence. Monsieur Crane, you have been quiet, but your resentment speaks volumes. Miss Grey asked Jenkins about the crew's schedules, yes, because she suspected you. You were not at the table at 8 o'clock, slipped out, claiming a headache, but no one saw you leave. You met Miss Grey on the upper deck, where she confronted you with her knowledge, not only of Sir Reginald's embezzlement, but of your role in it. You were his accomplice, siphoning funds through a false account. She wrote R in her diary, but it was a mistake. She meant V.C. Crane's face twisted, his voice a snarl. That's absurd. You've no proof. Poirot held up the brass key. This key, monsieur, opens a safe deposit box in London, where you hid the stolen funds. Miss Grey found evidence of it in the ledger. You killed her with the letter opener from Sir Reginald's desk, stolen earlier to cast suspicion on him. The blue silk thread came from your tie, caught as you leaned over the railing, and the earring you took it from Madame Baxter's cabin. To mislead, Crane lunged forward, his face contorted. You're mad. I was at the table. But Poirot's voice was relentless. Nan, monsieur, your alibi is false. Mademoiselle Langley saw you slip out, did she not? Beatrice Langley nodded, her smile sharp. I did, just before 8. I thought you were ill, but you were quick on your feet. Crane's shoulders slumped, his face ashen. I didn't mean to kill her. She was going to ruin everything. I only wanted to talk, but she wouldn't listen. The room erupted in gasps, Lady Evelyn's sob mingling with Clara Baxter's cry. Sir Reginald's face was thunderous. But Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm. The truth, it is revealed. Monsieur Crane, you will face justice. As Mortimer led Crane away, the saloon fell silent, the weight of the truth settling over the guests. Poirot turned to Hastings, his eyes weary but satisfied. The little grey cells, they do not fail, mon ami. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The sapphire yacht lay silent under the Cornish stars, its opulent decks now a stage for resolution rather than suspicion. The revelation of Victor Crane as Miss Sylvia Grey's murderer had lifted the oppressive weight that had hung over the vessel, but the air remained heavy with the aftershocks of truth. The guests, shaken by the dramatic unmasking in the saloon, had dispersed to their cabins, their faces etched with relief, guilt, and lingering unease. Hercule Poirot, the architect of the solution, stood alone on the upper deck, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the dark expanse of the sea dot. Captain Arthur Hastings joined him, his steps slow, his mind still reeling from the events of the evening, the clues, the pearl earring, the grease smudge, the blue silk thread, the cryptic note, the brass key, and the ledger had been woven into a tapestry of logic by Poirot's little grey cells, revealing Victor Crane's guilt with devastating clarity. Yet Hastings felt a pang of disquiet, as though the final act had left questions unanswered. "Poirot," he said, his voice low in the quiet night, "you did it. You found the killer." Crane's confessionate was like something out of a novel. "But how did you know it was him?" There were so many possibilities. Poirot turned, his green eyes glinting in the lantern's glow. "Mon ami, the truth is always simple when one sees it clearly. The clues, they were like stars in a constellation scattered at first, but forming a pattern when viewed with the right perspective. Come, let us walk, and I shall explain." They strolled along the deck, the gentle lapping of waves, a soothing counterpoint to the gravity of their conversation. Poirot's voice was calm, almost philosophical, as he began. "The murder of Miss Grey, it was not a crime of passion, but of calculation. She was a threat, not only to Sir Reginald's secrets, but to another's, Victor Crane's. The ledger, it was the key, but not in the way we first thought." Hastings frowned, his notebook tucked under his arm. "You mean the embezzlement? Crane was Sir Reginald's accomplice, wasn't he?" "Oui," Poirot said, his moustache twitching. "But let us retrace the steps. Miss Grey, she was meticulous, observant, a woman who saw what others missed. In her role as Sir Reginald's secretary, she discovered discrepancies in his ledger's funds, siphoned to a false account. Her diary spoke of R hiding something, and we assumed it was Sir Reginald. But the note, 'I know what you've done,' and the letter in her desk pointed to a deeper truth." He paused, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "The blue silk thread was the first clue that turned my thoughts. It was not from a lady's gown, as we suspected, but from a man's Crane's tie, which he wore that evening. A small detail, but it placed him at the scene. The pearl earring, belonging to Madame Baxter, was a clever misdirection, stolen from her cabin to cast suspicion elsewhere. The grease smudge, it was a red herring, perhaps from routine maintenance, but it served to distract us toward the crew." Hastings nodded, his mind piecing it together. "And the note, she meant it for Crane, didn't she?" "Precisement," Poirot said. "Miss Grey discovered that Crane, not Sir Reginald, was the architect of the embezzlement. Sir Reginald was negligent, perhaps complicit, but Crane was the mastermind, funneling funds to a safe deposit box in London, which the brass key would open. She confronted him, arranging to meet on the upper deck at 7:45, but Crane, fearing exposure, acted first, using the letter opener from Sir Reginald's desk to silence her." Hastings shook his head, marvelling. "It's so simple when you explain it, Poirot. But Crane's alibi, he said he was at the table at 8. "A lie," Poirot said, his voice firm. "Mademoiselle Langley saw him slip out just before 8, and no one could confirm his presence during the critical minutes. His resentment, his silence, it was the demeanour of a man guarding a secret. When Lady Evelyn revealed her suspicions about Sir Reginald, it gave Crane a chance to hide behind the chaos, but his actions in the study betrayed him." Hastings frowned, a lingering doubt surfacing. But Julian Trent, why was he in the study? He seemed so guilty. Poirot's smile was gentle. Monsieur Trent, he was curious, perhaps foolish. Miss Grey confided in him about the ledger, and he sought to uncover the truth for himself, hoping to play the hero. But his presence in the study was a gifted flushed crane from his hiding place, forcing him to act. They paused at the railing where Miss Grey had fallen, the bloodstain now cleaned, but the memory vivid. Hastings felt a chill, not from the night air, but from the weight of the crime. "Poor Miss Grey," he said softly. "She was just doing her job, and it cost her life." Poirot's expression softened, a rare glimpse of empathy in his precise demeanor. "Oui, Hastings. She was a woman of integrity, caught in a web of greed. Her death, it is a tragedy, but it is also a lesson. The human heart, it is capable of great good and great evil. It is why I, Hercule Poirot, pursue the truth not for glory, but to restore order where chaos reigns." Hastings looked at his friend, struck by the quiet conviction in his words. "You always say it's about the little grey cells, Poirot, but it's more than that. It's about understanding people, their motives, their fears." Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You begin to understand, mon ami. The little grey cells, they see the clues, but it is the heart that interprets them. In this case, it was Miss Grey's heart, her courage to confront, the seat that led to her end, and it was the heart of the guilty that betrayed them." The yacht rocked gently, the stars now visible through a break in the clouds. Poirot turned, his gaze sweeping the deck. "Tomorrow we shall return to shore, and Monsieur Crane will face justice. Sir Reginald, too, must answer for his negligence, though he is not the murderer. The others, Lady Evelyn, Madame Baxter, Monsieur Trenthey, will carry their own burdens, their secrets exposed." Hastings nodded, his voice thoughtful, and Beatrice Langley. "She saw everything, didn't she? Her notebook must be a goldmine." Poirot chuckled softly. "Mademoiselle Langley, she is a novelist, and this tragedy will no doubt inspire her next work. But she is no killer, only an observer of the human condition. Let her write her story, it will do no harm." They stood in silence for a moment, the sea stretching endlessly before them. Hastings felt a sense of closure, but also a melancholy, for the lives touched by the crime. "What now, Poirot? Back to London?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "For now, yes, but the world, it is full of mysteries, Hastings, and where there is mystery, there is Hercule Poirot. Come, let us retire. The little grey cells, they deserve a rest." As they descended to their cabins, the sapphire yacht seemed to sigh, its secrets laid bare. The case was closed, the truth revealed, but the echoes of Miss Grey's death would linger, a reminder of the fragile balance between order and chaos. Poirot, with his unyielding logic and quiet compassion, had restored that balance, and Hastings, ever his faithful companion, felt a renewed admiration for the little Belgian detective who saw what others could not. Chapter 12. The aftermath. The sapphire yacht cut through the early morning mist, its engines humming as it made its slow return to the Cornish shore. The opulent vessel, once a symbol of Sir Reginald Haverford's wealth and ambition, now carried the weight of a resolved tragedy. Victor Crane's confession to the murder of Miss Sylvia Grey had lifted the suffocating veil of suspicion, but it left in its wake a sombre mood among the passengers. The clossed pearl earring, grease smudge, blue silk thread, cryptic note, brass key, and incriminating ledger had been masterfully woven together by Hercule Poirot's little grey cells, revealing a tapestry of greed and betrayal. Yet, as the yacht approached St. Mars, the guests grappled with the personal repercussions of the truth. Captain Arthur Hastings stood on the upper deck, his hands gripping the railing as he watched the coastline emerge from the mist. The events of the previous night, the dramatic confrontation in the saloon, Crane's collapse under Poirot's relentless logic played in his mind like scenes from a film. He felt a mix of relief and unease, the satisfaction of justice tempered by the lingering shadows of the case. Poirot, ever the picture of composure, joined him, his grey suit immaculate, his moustache perfectly waxed despite the early hour. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice soft but clear in the quiet morning. "You are troubled, mon ami. The case is solved, the murderer unmasked. Yet you stand here as though the sea holds more secrets." Hastings turned, his brow furrowed. It's not over, is it, Poirot? Crane's going to jail, but what about the others? Sir Reginald's embezzlement, Lady Evelyn's suspicions, Trent's sneaking about, it's all left a mess. And poor Miss Grey, caught in the middle of it all. Poirot nodded, his green eyes thoughtful. "We, Hastings. A crime, it is like a stone dropped in a pond. The ripples spread far beyond the act itself. But this is the nature of human affairs. We, who seek the truth, can only restore order where we find chaos." They walked along the deck, passing the spot where Miss Grey's body had been found. The bloodstain was gone, scrubbed clean by the crew, but Hastings could still picture her there, the letter opener in her chest, the pearl earring glinting beside her. "You were brilliant, Poirot," he said, his voice earnest. "The way you pieced it together, the thread, the key, the ledger. But how did you know it was Crane and not Sir Reginald?" The ledger pointed so strongly to him. Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. The ledger, it was a beacon, but it illuminated more than one shadow. Sir Reginald's negligence made him complicit, but his anger was that of a man caught in a web, not a murderer. Crane, however, his silence, his resentment, his absence at the critical moment, these were the signs of guilt. The blue silk thread. It was the final confirmation. It came from his tie, not a lady's gown, and it placed him at the scene. Hastings shook his head, marvelling. And the earring, that was a clever trick, planting it to throw suspicion on Clara Baxter. "We," Poirot said, his voice tinged with disapproval, "a crude deception, but effective. Crane stole it from Madame Baxter's cabin, knowing it would muddy the waters. But the little grey cells, they see through such ploys." As they reached the saloon, where the guests were gathered for a subdued breakfast, the atmosphere was markedly different from the previous days. Sir Reginald sat at the head of the table, his face haggard, his usual bombast replaced by a weary silence. Lady Evelyn, beside him, sipped her tea with trembling hands, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. Clara Baxter, subdued for once, sat close to her husband, who maintained his clinical calm but seemed distant. Julian Trent, his boyish charm extinguished, picked at his food, his gaze fixed on his plate. Beatrice Langley, ever observant, scribbled in her notebook, though her usual spark of curiosity was tempered by a sombre air. Poirot took his place at the table, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. "Madame et messieurs," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "the tragedy of Miss Grey's death has been resolved. Monsieur Crane has confessed, and justice will be served. But I must address one final matter, the ledger, Sir Reginald's." Head snapped up, his voice hoarse. The ledger. You've made your point, Poirot. I've admitted 2 oversights. Must you drag it out further? Poirot's gaze was steady. Monsieur, your oversights enabled Crane's crime, but they do not excuse it. The ledger shows funds siphoned to a false account, managed by Crane but under your name. You must face the consequences, as must he. Lady Evelyn's voice was a whisper. Reginald, how could you? All those years, and you let this happen. Sir Reginald's shoulders slumped, his voice heavy. I trusted Crane. He handled the accounts, said it was all above board. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Clara Baxter's voice, sharp but trembling, broke the silence. Hurt. Sylvia's dead because of your greed. And that earring, my earring, made me look like a suspect. Dr. Baxter placed a hand on her arm, his tone soothing. Clara, it's over. Monsieur Poirot has cleared your name. Julian Trent looked up, his voice bitter. And me. I was a fool, poking around the study, but I wasn't a killer. Sylvia trusted me, and I let her down. Beatrice Langley's pen paused, her eyes meeting Poirot's. You've given me quite a story, Monsieur Poirot, but it's a tragedy, not a triumph. Sylvia deserved better. Poirot inclined his head, his expression sombre. You are right, mademoiselle. Miss Grey was a woman of courage, seeking to right a wrong. Her death is a loss, but her truth has been honored. As breakfast ended, the guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy with the weight of the revelations. Poirot and Hastings returned to the deck where Captain Mortimer awaited with news. The authorities are ready at St. Maur's, sir, he said, his scarred face grim. They'll take Crane into custody as soon as we dock. Bon Poirot said, his voice firm. And the ledger, it must be turned over as evidence. The truth, it must be complete. Mortimer nodded, then hesitated. Sir, about Jenkins, he's been acting strange, muttering about Miss Grey. I think he knew more than he let on. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Monsieur Jenkins, his nerves betray him. Speak with him again, but gently. He may have seen something. He fears to admit. As Mortimer left, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice thoughtful. You think Jenkins was involved, don't you? Not in the murder, but in something else. Perhaps, Poirot said, his gaze drifting to the sea. He may have seen Crane with Miss Grey, or overheard their confrontation. But his role, it is secondary. The heart of the crime lies with Crane, and the heart of the solution lies with the truth. The yacht drew closer to shore, the cliffs of St. Maur's, now clear in the morning light. Hastings felt a sense of closure, but also a lingering melancholy for the lives altered by the crime. What happens now, Poirot? For Sir Reginald, Lady Evelyn, the others. Poirot's voice was soft, almost philosophical. They will face their own reckonings, Hastings. Sir Reginald must answer for his negligence, Lady Evelyn for her silence, Trent for his recklessness. But life, it continues, and they will find their way. As for us, we return to London, where other mysteries await. Hastings smiled, warmed by his friend's quiet confidence. You're never done, are you, Poirot? Always chasing the next puzzle. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The world, it is full of puzzles, mon ami, and where there is a puzzle, there is Hercule Poirot to solve it. As the yacht docked at St. Maur's, the authorities boarded, taking Victor Crane into custody. The guests watched in silence, their faces a mix of relief and sorrow. Poirot, with Hastings at his side, stepped onto the pier, his hat tilted at a precise angle, his expression serene. The sapphire yacht lay behind them, its secrets laid bare, its story complete. But for Poirot, the pursuit of truth was an endless journey, and Hastings knew they would soon face another. Chapter 13. The unravelling threads. The sapphire yacht rested at the dock in St. Maur's, its once gleaming hull now a sombre monument to the tragedy that had unfolded aboard. The morning sun bathed the Cornish coast in a soft light, but the air carried a chill, as though the sea itself mourned the loss of Miss Sylvia Grey. Victor Crane, the confessed murderer, had been taken into custody by the local authorities, his dour demeanour replaced by a defeated slump as he was led away in handcuffs. The ledger, with its damning evidence of embezzlement, was in the hands of the police, promising further scrutiny for Sir Reginald Haverford. Yet, for Hercule Poirot, the case was not entirely closed. There were threads left untied, small inconsistencies, that nagged at his meticulous mind. Captain Arthur Hastings stood on the pier, his suitcase at his feet, watching the bustle of police and crew as they secured the yacht. The resolution of the murder had brought relief, but also a sense of disquiet. The guests, now preparing to disembark, carried the weight of their own secrets: Lady Evelyn's suspicions, Julian Trent's recklessness, Clara Baxter's fear of being implicated. Hastings felt the case had left a mark on them all, himself included. He turned to Poirot, who stood nearby, his grey suit immaculate, his eyes scanning the scene with quiet intensity. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "It's over, isn't it?" Crane confessed. "The ledgers with the police, and we're headed back to London. Yet you look as though you're still hunting for something." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Mon ami, you know me well. The case, it is solved, but the mind of Hercule Poirot is never at rest until every detail is accounted for. There is a small matter of thread, if you will, that remains loose." Hastings frowned, his hand tightening on his suitcase. "A thread? You mean the blue silk one? But you proved it was from Crane's tie." Poirot said, his voice low. "But there is another thread, not of silk, but of motive. Monsieur Jenkins, the steward, his nervousness troubles me. He knows something, Hastings, something he has not yet revealed, and I suspect it concerns Miss Grey's final hours." They boarded the yacht one last time, at Poirot's request, to speak with Jenkins before departing. The saloon, once a stage for tension and suspicion, was now nearly empty, its chandelier dimmed, its tables cleared. The guests were packing, their voices hushed as they prepared to leave the sapphire yacht behind. Captain Mortimer met Poirot and Hastings at the entrance, his scarred face weary but cooperative. "Jenkins is in the galley, sir," Mortimer said, his tone subdued. "He's been keeping to himself since last night. I've tried talking to him, but he's clammed up." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Merci, Monsieur Mortimer. Lead us to him, if you please." The galley was a small, utilitarian space, its stainless steel surfaces gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Jenkins, the wiry steward, stood polishing a tray, his hands trembling, his nervous tic more pronounced than ever. He looked up as Poirot entered, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Monsieur Jenkins," Poirot began, his voice gentle but firm, "you have been most helpful, but I sense you carry a burden. Miss Grey, she spoke to you about the cruise schedules. What did she ask, and why does it trouble you so?" Jenkins' hands froze, the tray clattering to the counter. I told you, sir. She asked about who was on duty, who left, The yacht at port. I thought it was for Sir Reginald's business, but he swallowed, his tic twitching violently. She was scared, sir. That last day, she came to me, asked if I'd seen anyone near the study late at night. I told her I hadn't, but I lied. Hastings' eyes widened, his voice sharp. You lied. Good Lord, man, why? Jenkins' shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. I saw Monsieur Crane, sir, the night before the murder. He was coming out of the study, looking furtive, like he didn't want to be seen. I didn't think much of it then, but when Miss Grey asked, I was afraid to tell. Her Crane's got a temper, and I didn't want trouble. Poirot's gaze was piercing. And you told no one, not even after her death. Jenkins shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. I was scared, sir. I thought if I said anything, he'd come after me next. I'm sorry, should have spoken. Up, Poirot's expression softened, though his voice remained firm. You have spoken now, Monsieur Jenkins, and that is enough. Your silence, it protected you, but it also protected Crane for a time. The truth, it is always better, even when it is painful. As they left the galley, Hastings turned to Poirot, his mind racing. That's why Crane acted so quickly, isn't it? He knew Miss Grey was onto him, and Jenkins' silence gave him the chance to strike. Precisement, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. Jenkins' fear was a shield for Crane, but also a clue. His nervousness, it was not guilt, but knowledge. This small thread, it completes the pattern. They returned to the pier, where the guests were now disembarking, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. Sir Reginald stood with Lady Evelyn, his arm around her, though the distance between them was palpable. Clara Baxter clung to her husband, her usual vivacity subdued, while Dr. Baxter offered a curt nod to Poirot, a silent acknowledgement of his work. Julian Trent, his suitcase in hand, avoided eye contact, his boyish charm replaced by a sombre air. Beatrice Langley, her notebook tucked under her arm, paused to address Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice warm but tinged with melancholy. You've given me a story I'll never forget, but it's a dark one. I hope you don't mind if I borrow your methods for my next novel? Poirot's smile was genuine. Mademoiselle Langley, you may borrow my methods, but not my moustache. It is unique, Nan. She laughed, a spark of her usual wit returning, and boarded the waiting car to the train station. As the guests departed, Hastings felt a sense of finality settling over the case. The sapphire yacht, its secrets exposed, would soon be just. Memory, its story one of tragedy and truth. Poirot, Hastings said, as they prepared to board their own car. What happens to them now? Sir Reginald, Lady Evelyn, the others. Poirot's gaze drifted to the yacht, now silent at the dock. Sir Reginald will face scrutiny for his role in the embezzlement, though his punishment will be less severe than Crane's. Lady Evelyn. She must rebuild trust with her husband, a task not easily done. Monsieur Trent will learn from his recklessness, and Madame Baxter, she will carry the weight of her misplaced earring. Life, it continues, Hastings, and they will find their way. Hastings nodded, his voice thoughtful, and Jenkins. He feels guilty for staying silent. We, Poirot said, his tone gentle, but he has unburdened himself, and that is a start. The human heart, it heals, even from its own mistakes. As they climbed into the car, the sapphire yacht receded into the distance, its silhouette fading into the mist. Hastings felt a pang of melancholy for Miss Grey, whose courage had cost her life, and a quiet admiration for Poirot, whose logic had brought justice. "Another case solved," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You never cease to amaze me, Poirot." Poirot's eyes twinkled, his voice light but firm. "The little grey cells, mon ami, they do not rest. But for now we return to London, where a good cup of tisane awaits, and perhaps another mystery." The car pulled away, carrying them toward the train station and the world beyond. The sapphire yacht stood as a testament to the fragility of human greed and the power of truth, a chapter closed but never forgotten in the endless story of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 14. The echoes of truth. The train from St. Maur's to London rattled through the Cornish countryside, its rhythmic clatter a counterpoint to the sombre mood of its passengers. The sapphire yacht lay behind, docked at the pier, its polished decks now a silent witness to the tragedy of Miss Sylvia Grey's murder. Victor Crane, unmasked as the killer and Sir Reginald Haverford's accomplice in embezzlement, was in the hands of the authorities, his confession a stark resolution to the web of deceit that had ensnared the yacht's guests. Yet, for Hercule Poirot, the case lingered like a faint melody, its final notes unresolved until every echo of truth had been heard. Captain Arthur Hastings sat opposite Poirot in their private compartment, the countryside blurring past the window, in shades of green and gold. His suitcase rested at his feet, his notebook tucked inside, filled with the details of the case de pearl earring, the grease smudge, the blue silk thread, the cryptic note, the brass key, and the incriminating ledger. The revelation of Jenkins' withheld knowledge had tied one loose thread. But Hastings sensed Poirot was still preoccupied, his mind turning over some unseen detail. "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "you've done it again. Crane's in custody, the ledger's with the police, and Jenkins has come clean. But you're still brooding. Is there something we've missed?" Poirot, his grey suit as immaculate as ever, adjusted his pince-nez and gazed out the window, his green eyes reflective. "Mon ami, the case is solved. But the mind of Hercule Poirot is like a clock, it ticks until every gear is in place. There is a small matter, a whisper of doubt, that lingers. It concerns Lady Evelyn." Hastings raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "Lady Evelyn, but she's not the killer. Her outburst about Sir Reginald and Miss Grey helped you crack the case, didn't it?" "Oui," Poirot said, his moustache twitching with a faint smile. Her revelation was the spark that ignited the truth. But her silence before that moment, her fear it, suggests she knew more than she admitted. "I wish to understand why," Hastings frowned, puzzled. "You think she was protecting someone, or hiding something of her own?" Poirot's gaze returned to the window, his voice soft. "Perhaps both, Hastings. The heart, it is complex. Lady Evelyn's love for her husband, her fear of his secrets, her suspicion of Miss Grey, these were not mere emotions, but threads in a larger tapestry. I wish to speak with her one last time before we reach London." The opportunity came sooner than expected. At the next station, a brief stop allowed Poirot to send a telegram to St. Maur's, requesting Lady Evelyn meet them at the station in Exeter, where the train would pause for 20 minutes. Hastings, though surprised, followed Poirot's lead. Accustomed to his friend's penchant for tying every loose end at Exeter, Lady Evelyn awaited on the platform, her delicate frame wrapped in a grey coat, her face pale but composed. The station bustled with travellers, but she stood apart, her eyes searching the crowd until they found Poirot. She approached, her steps hesitant, her hands clutching a small handbag. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "your telegram said you needed to speak with me. I thought the case was closed." Poirot inclined his head, his tone gentle but probing. "It is, madame, but the truth, it has echoes that must be heard. You played a vital role, revealing your husband's confrontation with Miss Grey. But I sense you held back. What did you fear?" Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, her fingers tightening on her handbag. "Fear? I was terrified, Monsieur Poirot. I thought Reginald had done something terrible. When I saw him with Sylvia in the study, I feared the worst, not just about the ledger, but about them." Hastings, standing beside Poirot, interjected softly. "You thought they were having an affair, didn't you?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes, Reginald was so distant, and Sylvia was always there, always watching. I saw them together, whispering, and I let my imagination run wild. When she was killed, I thought perhaps he'd done it to silence her. Not about money, but about us." Poirot's gaze was steady, his voice calm. "And yet, you did not speak of this until the dinner, when the pressure became too great. Why?" "Madame," Lady Evelyn's voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "I loved him, Monsieur Poirot. I still do, despite everything. I didn't want to believe he was capable of murder, but I couldn't be sure. When he spoke of the ledger, I knew I had to say something, even if it hurt him." Poirot nodded, his expression softening. "Your courage, it was the key to the truth, madame. But there is one more thing. Did you ever see Miss Grey with Monsieur Crane?" She hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Crane, yes, once, a few days before the murder. They were on the lower deck, speaking quietly. I couldn't hear what they said. But Sylvia looked determined, and Crane was angry. I thought it was about work, but now," Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Mercy, madame. This confirms what I suspected. Miss Grey confronted Crane about the embezzlement, and he acted to protect his secret. Your silence, it was born of love, but your truth has brought justice." Lady Evelyn's shoulders relaxed, a tear escaping down her cheek. "Thank you, monsieur. Poirot, I feel lighter somehow. But what happens now?" To Reginald, Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "Your husband must face the consequences of his negligence, madame. The ledger will expose his role, though he is not the murderer. You must decide how to move forward, together or apart." She nodded, her expression resolute. "I will, thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for everything." As she turned to leave, Hastings watched her go, his heart heavy. "Poor woman," he said softly. "She's been through so much suspecting her husband, carrying that fear alone." "Oui," Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. "But she is stronger than she appears. The truth, it is a burden, but also a liberation." They reboarded the train, the whistles sounding as it pulled away from Exeter. Hastings settled into his seat, his mind turning over Lady Evelyn's words. That's it, then. The last piece of the puzzle. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, almost mon ami. There is one final matter, the brass key. It opens a safe deposit box in London, where Crane hid the stolen funds. The police will recover it, but I suspect there may be more. To learn about his accomplices, perhaps beyond the yacht. Hastings' eyes widened. You think there's more to this? Another conspiracy. Perhaps, Poirot said, his gaze drifting to the window. But for now, our work is done. The Sapphire Yacht has given up its secrets, and justice will follow. The train rolled on, carrying them toward London and the familiar comforts of home. Hastings felt a sense of closure, tempered by the knowledge that the ripples of the case would linger for Sir Reginald and Lady Evelyn, for the Baxters, for Julian Trent, and even for Beatrice Langley, whose novel would no doubt immortalize the tragedy. He glanced at Poirot, whose serene expression belied the relentless workings of his mind. "You're already thinking of the next case, aren't you?" Hastings said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The world, it is never short of mysteries, Hastings. And where there is mystery, there is Hercule Poirot, ready to restore order with the little grey cells." As the countryside gave way to the outskirts of London, Hastings leaned back, content in the knowledge that, with Poirot at his side, no secret could remain hidden for long. The sapphire yacht was behind them, but its echoes would resonate, a testament to the power of truth and the indomitable spirit of the little Belgian detective. Chapter 15. The final reckoning. The train from St. Mawes pulled into London's Paddington Station under a grey afternoon sky, its whistle a mournful note that marked the end of the journey from the sapphire yacht, the opulent vessel now a distant memory docked on the Cornish coast, had been the stage for a tragedy that had unravelled the lives of its passengers. Victor Crane, the murderer of Miss Sylvia Grey, was in custody, his confession exposing a web of embezzlement woven with Sir Reginald Haverford's negligence. The Clouspearl earring, grease smudge, blue silk thread, cryptic note, brass key, and incriminating ledger had been masterfully pieced together by Hercule Poirot's little grey cells, bringing justice to a crime that had shaken the gilded world of the yacht. Yet, as Captain Arthur Hastings stepped onto the platform, his suitcase in hand, he sensed that Poirot's work was not entirely done. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his grey suit, adjusted his hat and surveyed the bustling station with a serene intensity. His green eyes, ever alert, seemed to see beyond the crowd, as though tracing the final threads of the case. Hastings, walking beside him, felt a mix of relief and curiosity. Lady Evelyn's revelations at Exeter had tied one loose end, but Poirot's preoccupation suggested there was still a note to be played in this symphony of truth. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice tinged with impatience, "we've solved the murder, Crane's locked up, and the ledgers with the police. Surely that's the end of it. Or are you still chasing that brass key?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Mon ami, you are eager for the curtain to fall, but the stage is not yet empty. The brass key, it is the final piece. It opens a safe deposit box in London, where Crane hid the stolen funds, but I suspect it may reveal more a final echo of Miss Grey's courage. Come, we shall visit the bank before we rest." Hastings sighed, accustomed to Poirot's relentless pursuit of detail. "Right then. Lead on, old chap." They took a taxi to a discreet bank in the city of London, its marble facade a bastion of secrecy. Poirot, armed with a letter from the St. Mawes authorities, presented the brass key to the manager, a dour man with a penchant for efficiency. The safe deposit box, registered under a false name linked to Crane, was opened in a private room, revealing a stack of documents, a bundle of cash, and a small, sealed envelope. Poirot's gloved hands moved with precision as he opened the envelope, revealing a single sheet of paper in Miss Grey's neat handwriting. It was a letter dated the day before her death, addressed to the authorities. It read, "If you find this, I am likely dead. Victor Crane and Sir Reginald Haverford have been embezzling funds from Haverford Shipping. The ledger in Sir Reginald's study holds the proof. I tried to confront them, but I fear for my safety. Sylvia Grey. Hastings' eyes widened, his voice hushed. Good Lord, Poirot, she knew she was in danger. She left this as a failsafe. Oui, Poirot said, his voice soft with reverence. Miss Grey was a woman of extraordinary courage. She suspected her life was at risk, yet she acted to ensure the truth would be found. This letter, it seals Crane's fate and confirms Sir Reginald's complicity. Hastings shook his head, a mix of admiration and sorrow washing over him. She deserved better, Poirot, to think she faced that alone. Poirot's expression was sombre, his eyes fixed on the letter. She was not alone in the end, Hastings. Her truth has spoken, and we have heard it. The little grey cells, they have honoured her. They handed the contents of the box to the bank manager, who assured them it would be delivered to the authorities. As they stepped back into the London drizzle, Hastings felt a sense of finality settling over the case. The sapphire yacht, with its glittering facade and hidden darkness, was behind them, but its lessons lingered. What now, Poirot? Hastings asked, pulling his coat tighter against the rain. Back to your flat for that tizen you're always going on about. Poirot's eyes twinkled, a spark of his usual vigour returning. Oui, mon ami, a tisane, and a moment of repose. But the world, it does not pause. There are always mysteries waiting for Hercule Poirot. They walked through the bustling streets, the city's pulse a contrast to the quiet intensity of the yacht. Hastings reflected on the case, the tangled motives, the subtle clues, the human frailties exposed. Sir Reginald would face legal scrutiny, his reputation tarnished by his negligence. Lady Evelyn, grappling with her husband's betrayal, would need time to heal. Julian Trent, chastened by his recklessness, might find redemption in caution. Clara Baxter, cleared of suspicion, would carry the memory of her stolen earring. Beatrice Langley, ever the observer, would weave the tragedy into her next novel, immortalizing the sapphire yacht in fiction, and Jenkins, the nervous steward, would live with the guilt of his silence, though his belated truth had aided Poirot's pursuit. Hastings glanced at his friend, whose serene confidence was a beacon in the chaos of human affairs. You know, Poirot, he said, a smile tugging at his lips, you make it look so easy, but it's anything but. How do you do it see through all the lies and get to the heart of things? Poirot's smile was gentle, almost philosophical. The heart, Hastings, it is the key. The clues, they are the map, but the heart guides the way. Miss Grey's heart was brave, Crane's was greedy, Lady Evelyn's was torn. To understand the heart is to understand the crime, and the little grey cells, they never fail to listen. They reached Poirot's flat, its familiar warmth a welcome contrast to the damp streets. As Poirot prepared his cherished tisane, Hastings settled into an armchair, his mind drifting back to the yacht. The sapphire yacht was a memory now, its story one of tragedy and triumph, of greed and justice. Miss Sylvia Grey, a quiet woman with a fierce resolve, had been its heart, and Poirot had been its mind, restoring order where chaos had reigned. As they sipped their drinks, the rain pattering against the windows, Hastings raised his cup in a silent toast. To Miss Grey, he said softly, and to you, Poirot, another case solved. Poirot inclined his head, his eyes warm. To Miss Grey and to the truth, mon ami, it is always worth the pursuit. The fire crackled in the hearth, the city hummed beyond the walls, and the world turned on, its mysteries waiting for the little Belgian detective whose logic and compassion illuminated even the darkest corners. The sapphire yacht was behind them, but its echoes would linger, a testament to the enduring power of truth.